Welcome everybody to our school finance training, November 17th. Let me get the agenda pulled up here. My name is Sam Uri. It's great to be with you. I am the school finance director here at USBE. I'll do a quick run through of the agenda and we'll get going on our training here. So after I do a few updates, Kathleen Britton from our child nutrition programs, our director, will give us an update. Afterwards at 9:45, Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives at USBE, will give us an update on COVID-19 relief funding, ESSER, ARP ESSER. At 10:15, Dale Frost, our MSP Administrator and Fiscal Policy Analyst, will give us some updates on USBE funding request priorities, mid-year updates, and allotment memos. We'll have a break, and then two of our folks from USBE Purchasing, Adam Hurd and Michael Iwasaki, will present to us on procurement. Afterwards, Tony Onofrietti, our grants compliance officer here at USBE, will go over grants compliance and reimbursement requests. We'll take a 1-hour lunch. Afterwards, Brett Baltazar's team will present on indirect costs, GASB updates, fund balances, and function codes. And last but not least, Ron Litchfield will present to us on school transportation updates. All right, so I just wanted to take a few quick minutes here to kind of introduce myself quickly. It's great to be here at USBE. I've been here since about October 5th, and great to be here with you. Let me get this out of the way. So there's myself and Fam. I've been the last 5 years an LEA business administrator for 2 different charter schools. Really enjoyed doing that. I started my career in agricultural education. I taught welding and ag science in Southern California for a few years and managed an educational program for the University of California for a few years as well. Done a few things in industry as well. I am a very average skier, but trying to keep up with my 8-year-old as much as I can. So we'll be up at Brighton when we can and trying to get a little bit better. But I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to support you. I appreciate all of you and what you're doing for the students in our schools, and just want to be here to support you as much as possible. My contact info is there. It is on our website, and the link is there on our schools.utah.gov financial operations website. That is my cell phone number. Feel free to call, text, whatever you need to do, but want to be responsive to you and get you any information that you need. Okay. So just a quick overview of our fiscal monitoring team. Cole Shakespeare is our fiscal monitor team manager, and he presented at UASBO and the Charter Business Administrators meetings in the last few weeks. But just an overview, if you missed that, he's got a team of fiscal monitors that we've kind of pulled from the separate program sections into a centralized fiscal monitoring team that we hope will make things easier on you as LEAs, so that you can, we can coordinate site visits and try to streamline those operations as much as we can. So Neil Stevens is the fiscal monitor team lead and covers special education and IDA. We've got Jeff Conley in CTE. Corey Erickson also helps with special education. Clint Hulk in adult ed, at risk, youth in custody, those types of programs. We've got Joe Hovey in on the mental health program, Title 2A, Title 4A in transportation. Tammy Long with Title 1A, Title 3, and ESSER funds. Marilee Wendell on Title 1C, 1D, McKinney-Vento, 21st Century, those kinds of things. And, you know, with our ongoing school fees, trainings and updates, we're going to pull the, you know, eventually at the start of next fiscal year, we'll pull the school fees monitoring team under Cole's fiscal monitoring team umbrella. Any questions about that? Okay. And you'll hear from the school finance team later today. So those are Brett Baltazar is our school finance manager, John Palmer, Dallin Pinier, and Laura Wilson are our school finance specialists. And you'll also hear from Del Frost, who's our MSP administrator, fiscal policy analyst. His team consists of Kieran McInnes. Many of you have probably worked with her on our AUP enrollment procedures and things like that. And we are recruiting for a MSP financial analyst. The sound isn't good on YouTube. Okay. All right, we're gonna pause for a minute for sound purposes. Alex, do I need to switch microphones or try on the Zoom link here? Are you playing through your computer? I'm not at this point. Let's see. Sorry about those technical difficulties, folks. If I can. Okay, Alex is saying sound is fine. Continue with this mic. All right, but anyway, let us know if there's any other issues that come up. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so that's our MSP team, and like I say, you'll hear more from Del Frost today. Our Utah Grants team is Rebecca Nelson, is our grant system administrator, and then Tracy Peterson is also a grant system administrator, and you can contact them at utahgrants@schools.utah.gov. They are fantastic, and I know they helped me out a lot when I was a BA, so appreciate them and what they do. And then I don't have a good name for this, but I called them the A team. So I have Tony Onofriedi is our grants compliance officer. Ron Litchfield is our state transportation specialist. Matthew Barrett is our construction and facility specialist. And we are bringing on board in the near future Dr. Nestor Rodriguez as the USBE economist. We're excited about that. And so all these folks are also under the school finance umbrella, and you'll hear from a couple of them today. So we'll get started with Kathleen. I believe she is, are you up there, Kathleen?
Do I need to come up there?
Yes, come up here if you would. I appreciate it. So Kathleen Britton is on her way up from child nutrition.
You present screen?
Yeah, let's do
Mine,
that.
mic or the mic on my.
I'll just use this mic.
Can they hear me though? Morning, everyone. Can you hear me? If you cannot, let us know. Okay, I'm Kathleen Britton, the Child Nutrition Programs Director, and we want to thank you for joining us today. We are going to be going over some quick outline of our program and general reminders just about the revenue to the school food service program, supply chain issues that we've had currently with emergency procurement, some staffing, our administrative reviews, food service management companies, and training. So just some general reminders that we have for you that everybody needs to maintain their own food service account. Everything needs to be separated, that many of you know, and that there's a limited net cash resource in the, that you can carry over. You can only carry your 3-month fund balance. Everything else needs to be marked of where you're going to be spending it. The federal regulations read that you need to send us a plan. We are still waiting on several districts and charters that had over 3-month fund balances last year that have not sent us a plan. So if you have not, please get that in. Any revenues that are used, so they have to be used solely for the food service department, and they need to be earmarked for that. They need to be allowable costs, and you have to have internal controls over that. You need to be able to monitor your SFAs and how the funds are being spent in the food service department. The CN emergency operation reimbursements that came through on the monthly allotment 2 months ago, I think it was, should be earmarked as 21 EOCSs, so please make sure you look at that. These funds were distributed to LEAs. They were based on meals that were lost between the months of March and June of 2020. So that is how that was figured out. Majority of school districts did receive some kind of funding for that. That funding was already expended, so you just need to put it towards salaries or food or anything in the past that was already used for 2020. I know that your budgets were closed out for those years, but you can earmark it this year for food or salaries. I've explained this to many of your food service directors. We've gone over this in our town halls with them. We also want to let you guys know that COVID and ESSER funds can be used in the CN programs, in your child nutrition programs, if you would like to help them with their labor costs or to increase their salaries to get more staffing. These funds are allowable to be used as long as you have that in your ESSER plan. You may use these funds for payrolls or benefits. If you have any questions on if you can't use your emergency operation funds and you need to return those to us, please reach out to myself or Scott Eddy and he can walk you through it. So as everybody knows now that all meals are free due to a waiver from USDA. And with that, USDA has allowed a higher reimbursement rate. They are using the summer reimbursement rate, which is a much higher rate than the regular NSLP rate. Summer reimbursement rates change every January of every year. That's their fiscal year. So the rate you are currently receiving goes through the end of December. Then a new rate will be determined for the rest of January through July. So make sure you look for that. We have made your food service directors aware of this too, so it is usually an increase due to the cost of living and the CPI. So that will change, and hopefully you will get a higher reimbursement for your January claims. You can look at this through CMP Web. You can view that under the sponsor claims. If you need help navigating through CMP Web, please reach out to us. If you need access to CMP Web in any way, we are here to help you get access for that also. It's important that you understand the business part of it as just as much as your food service directors should understand that. Claims for reimbursement. Okay, this is a big one that was discussed between Scott Jones and myself, and you should have received an email on October 26th discussing that through some claim variances that we run here as edit checks, we noticed that the meals in September were quite higher than previous months and compared to that. When we drilled it down to the junior high and high schools had over 100% of what they normally do. We asked then through a town hall with our food service directors that they make sure they have an edit check, 1 meal per student. The agreement that the school district signed with USBE states that you will make sure that only 1 meal is served per child. We understand that through Seamless Summer, they can do a tally or a check, but the school district still has to have an edit check. Therefore, we highly, highly encouraged our district directors to make sure that they use their software systems, especially at their junior high and high schools, to avoid this. We did mention, as it was mentioned in the letter, that as being a compliance agency, that if we see this trend analysis occurring, we will be going out and doing unannounced site visits. We don't want to have to do this. We ask that everybody just look at their systems and make sure they have great edit checks in place. Does anybody have any questions on that claim reimbursement memo that was sent out? Because I know that we had a lot of questions from our food service directors. Okay, I don't see any. If you do, just reach out to me and we can talk about it. The next thing that we want to address is the supply chain that everybody is having right now. The supply chain shortages, the labor shortages, everybody is aware of, not just in food service, but just in general. The federal government has a waiver in place currently right now for emergency procurement. We marked it here on this slide, SP 23/2021. We have encouraged a lot of our food service directors to use this emergency procurement if they run into problems where they can't get the food that they had already bid out and procured. The caveat of this is not a one-time deal emergency procurement. So if you need to use it, you have to do your due diligence every 30 days. You can reapply for it, but you need to do your due diligence that you've actually reached out and tried to procure items. So that's one, and here's our flow chart of how this is under our forms and resources of what type of procurement they are doing, and hopefully this will help your food service directors and your procurement people to understand what USDA's requirements are. The next thing I'd like to address is staffing. I've addressed this with at the town hall also with our directors. They have reached out and asked if we could help somehow in figuring this out. So we did send out a survey to all the districts to find out what the current wages are and how many positions that were needed to be filled. The starting wage was around $12 to $13 at SFAs, but at the commercial sector, it's, whoops, sorry, that used to go back. But at the commercial sector, it was $15 an hour. So what we came across was that if you have a Burger King or McDonald's right across the street from your school district, they're not going to work in the food service department for $13 an hour. They're going to go work for $15 an hour. So we've encouraged our directors to work with the business administrators because they all do have a very large fund balance to increase these wages. so that they can be competitive. And as we all know, COVID hit in March, and we all realized from the community and everywhere else that our food service workers are our frontline workers. And without them, you can't run your programs. So we have heard that you have to be equitable with your aides and with everybody else, but work with them since they do have the funds to make sure they can have workers. If you don't have workers in your kitchens, you can't run your programs. We've also heard from a lot of our directors that these workers are getting burnt out and they're quitting because there isn't enough staff members. So we have tried to work with our directors. I've done this analysis for them. I've shared it with them. They can share it with you. If there's anything I can do to help you work with, I know as a prior director, I pulled my food service out to a separate lane to make sure that they were compensated fairly amongst where the commercial people are in that town. That may need to be done at your districts too, because the reason why some of these lines don't have a POS and they're not claiming these meals on a computer system is they don't have enough hands to do that. If they don't have enough hands to do that, then they can't serve the children because they will have to close the lines to make sure they have a correct edit check of the meals. So it's a ripple effect. So please, we ask that you work with them and try to come up with other solutions. I know that a lot of districts have been very creative and have raised their prices of their wages for their food service department. Does anybody have any questions over that?
Prior question on, you can read the question as.
I can't
It says,
see
are we,
it is the
well,
thing.
it's just, it's on the, so I'll read it to
Okay.
you. It says, are we supposed to receive a response back, spend down? Submitted ours in July and haven't.
Yes, you should have received a response back. Email me and I will make sure that it wasn't lost through all of starting the school year, your email, if you have sent it. We are tracking them, and Kim Loveland, the coordinator over the school program, can maybe talk a little bit more about that because I know she was handling those. Is there any other questions?
That was the only question.
Okay, any questions about staffing or how you can use your emergency funds for that? You can liquor tax reimbursement, that is another thing. Currently, the schools received $1.50 per meal from liquor tax. That can be used towards wages and benefits. ESSA funds that you will be getting for the next couple of years, if you put them in your plan, those can be used also. Okay, I'm going to pass it off now to Kim Loveland, who is the coordinator over the schools program, and she's going to talk about the administrative review process and how her team will go about doing that.
And if you want to try that, might work.
Oh,
But try and speak as directly. Close.
We can do that.
All right, hello. Just to go over the administrative review, actually, let me back up really quick. So the 3 months excess and the spend down plans, those were emailed out by Alvina from our office. And she's no longer with our department. So if the emails got lost due to that, I apologize for that. So if you haven't received a response on your spend down plan, please forward those to kimberly.loveland@schools.utah.gov. And we'll make sure to take care of those. Otherwise, I'll be reaching out to those of you individually if we still need a plan. So for our administrative reviews, those started this week. Boots are on the ground. So with that, hopefully some of you were able to attend the administrative review training that happened back in August. All of the SFAs, school food authorities have been notified of their reviews for this year. So we will be doing those on site. If something happens, we do have the capability to do desk reviews. But we do ask for your help in gathering some of the information for the resource management section of that review. You'll receive a notification letter from the assigned specialist requesting specific information in regards to the nonprofit food service account, indirect costs, net cash resources, non-program foods, and some other items. If you're not receiving those communications, we are sending those to the financial contact that we have in our CMP web system. So we want to make sure that we're getting the right information to the right people. So let us know if you have questions about that. There are pretty strict timelines on when we have to send information out to each one of your districts or charter schools and when we have to get that information back. And that is defined in the regulations. So we are adhering to those timelines. And if we don't get responses back for the comprehensive review offsite information, we do have to do a full comprehensive, which we'd rather not do if we can help it. So please reach out if you have any questions on any of that. One thing that we will be asking for as part of this review, and it will align with our procurement review that I'll talk about in a minute, is detailed general ledger. So we need to make sure that we're getting a detailed general ledger when we send these AR and procurement notices out. And so with that, we need to make sure that the documents or the reports that you send back to us are in an Excel format. And with that, we need the account number, the description, the journal description, expenditures, journal dates, check key, vendor names, invoice numbers. And that will help the reviewers quickly identify program expenditures that were made to the nonprofit food service account. So that would be a big, big help. We'll also be utilizing as much as we can from the financial operations website with the Schedule J for the APR and the Schedule M for indirect costs. And we will be looking at the previous closed out year on that. And that will be indicated in the notification letter that's sent out. Chris Bruin is overseeing our procurement reviews. Some of you have worked with him in the past with that. So we will just be requesting the detailed general ledger once, and that will suffice for both the administrative review and the procurement review. We do want to make sure that we have a copy of your most recent board-approved written procurement plan, and there are some specific things that we'll be looking for within that that are required under Child Nutrition Program regulations. Some of those things would include code of conduct, protest procedures. We also have the Buy American regulation that we have to abide by, so that needs to be addressed in that policy. Also, with the federal program, there's requirements for minority firms, women's business enterprises, labor surplus area firm statements, geographic preference restrictions, and then the Appendix 2 to Part 200 terms, and those all need to be addressed in that procurement plan. Chris will be requesting procurement records and invoices, and he will be in contact with you on that. If the biggest thing with these reviews is communication, right? So if you get the notification and you've got something coming up, let us know. We can work with you as much as we can as far as due dates and things like that. We know everyone has personal lives and busy work lives, so we will make adjustments the best we can on that, but we just ask for your cooperation. All right, right now we have one district and we have a handful of charter schools that are contracting with food service management companies this year. And so with that, we are required to do a review of those food service management contracts once every 3 years. And so it may align with your AR and procurement review, it may not. But just know that we are working on training. That will be happening in January. We will also be sending notices out to your charters or district as reminders to do a site monitoring visit that needs to be recorded. That form will be sent out here in the next little while. And we'll also do training on the food service management review process and what that looks like. So we will be completing those reviews this spring for all of you that currently have a contract. And just note that if your district or charter would like to contract with a food service management company, either for the remainder of this school year or for next school year, you need to notify the Child Nutrition Office. It is required that our state office review all bid solicitations and approve those and approve the contracts before they're signed. And that's a USDA requirement. So reach out to Chris Bruin or myself if you have questions about food service management company contracts and that review process. So this next slide has the training opportunities that we've got coming up after the new year. The procurement training will be January 19th. Food service management company, we will have, we will have 2 online trainings for food service management company posted and sent out in the next few weeks. So we would like those trainings to be watched. They're quick, easy little tidbits of what you need to do for food service management company. And then we'll do a recap session on the 26th just to answer questions and go through the review process. So know that those are up and coming trainings. And then the last thing we would like to direct your attention to is the resources that we have available online. USDA takes all of the reports that we send to them and they post it in different report tables. You've got the link there. So if you want to know number of meals and things like that, that's all right there at your fingertips. And then we also have a few reports posted on the Data and Statistics webpage under the USBE public webpage. If you go to the CNP NSLP tab, you'll find information on October survey, which we hope to have out in January. And we have our community eligibility provision reports and our paid lunch pricing reports. So those are currently there. And then I highly recommend going to Canvas. It's a public web page. We post announcements for job announcements. We also do a monthly update with program reminders and new information and best practices. So that goes out the first of each month and that's posted on Canvas. We also have a bunch of different courses that are just short little videos, and then we have various resources for different topics. And we do have sections on financial management and procurement for your reference there as well. So we highly encourage you to go to Canvas. We have an NSLP Central, which is school programs, and we have a Food Distribution Central page, which is all things USDA foods in school. So hopefully those are good helps for you. Any questions we can take at this point?
Questions?
Yes.
I got one for you guys. So with the EOC funding, do you know how that's going to be reviewed and looked at in the review process down the road? I'm just trying to understand. So I'm with Jordan. We got about $73,000, which isn't a whole lot in our nutrition fund. So I'm just trying to figure out how we need to either break that out and display it. Most of our funds just roll into one program at the district because they're all spent for nutrition. So I'm wondering, do I need to split that out separately and track that? Or if it's in that fund and we can demonstrate we had expenditures to match that, are we okay?
We are told from USDA that we need to look at it when we do come out on reviews. And we've encouraged our directors to work with you guys to expend it in one spot. So it's easy to notice. If you just earmark it for salaries and write that this was used for salaries, then that will be sufficient.
Perfect.
To add on that too, with all of the waivers in place, we will have a federal research team, Mathematica, that we have to report on the waivers and the funding and things like that. So that should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And then there will be an SFA survey that comes out as well. I'm not sure what they will have as far as those funds, but there may be some questions on that. And so we might be reaching out for some information on that. Just know that that's coming.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And we appreciate all the support that you give to your child nutrition programs. We ask that you maybe work with them on this labor shortage. There is an average of 6 to 50 positions opened at various districts, and we want to make sure all the children are fed healthy, nutritious meals, and we need the bodies to do that. So please work with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen and Kimberly. We appreciate that. Feel free to reach out with to them for any CNP child nutrition program questions. Okay, we will invite Sarah Young up here to the front and let her get set up. So prepare any questions you have for Sarah and shoot them into the YouTube chat, or if you're here in person, because Sarah loves questions.
Heck yes, I do. I'm a former science teacher.
There you go. There you go.
All right. Should I share my slide?
Present on Zoom. Are you,
So I started there and then hold on, I'll get it up. Okay.
Did she connect to the? Yeah, she should just connect to the intermediate.
Okay, do you still want me to present through Zoom?
No.
No, okay. Boom. Look at us go. Okay, great. Thank you for your patience as we work through some of those technical pieces. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Sarah Young. I am our Director of Strategic Initiatives here at the Utah State Board of Education. I am also our agency lead on the COVID-19 relief funding. So I'm here today to provide an overview of those funds and where we are collectively as a community, as well as just highlighting some items that are going to be of specific interest and note to those of our colleagues at LEAs who work in their business administrative departments. You'll note the date on the slide is October 20th, 2021. That is intentional because that is the date of which the data points that I'm presenting here today were officially collected and confirmed. So you may see some items where you're like, oh, I wonder if we're a little bit further along. We probably are, but we wanted to make sure that, like I said, we're presenting certified data to you for your records so you have clarity on where we are as a community. When we talk about COVID-19 relief funding, it is quite the umbrella because as we originally, you may remember, as a community received CARES funding in May of 2020, that's where our ESSER 1 and Gear 1 funds live. As a state, we also received 3 subsequent separate awards. The state 2020 coronavirus relief funding that was delivered through the U.S. legislature, that funding came from the U.S. Treasury, came through in a special session in August of 2020. We then then have the coronavirus supplemental award that came through late December of 2020 as well. That's where your ESSER 2, Gear 2, and a program we administer for our non-public schools, the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools, or EANS 1, appears. And then last but not least is the American Rescue Plan Act. And you'll note we call that in progress because it is something where we are still in process of delivering and certifying some of the applications from LEAs related to the award of ESSER funds. We also will have a secondary program for our non-public schools. That's the EANS in 4B. And then we have the American Rescue Plan to address our students experiencing homelessness, as well as IDEA funds that are separate. As a general overview, we like to share this with our legislators and our policymakers, so I'm sharing it with you here as well today. One of the things that is of interest and note related to all the COVID-19 funding is that over 90% of it has been directly distributed to the LEAs. So each of these individual awards that are called out describe not just the value, but also the purpose, and then the distribution method in which the formula funds that were used to be able to provide them, the number of the awards, and then the reimbursement deadline. At this point, there is over $900 million in active awards for coronavirus relief for K-12 education in Utah. And here at USBE, we are working together with you to manage over 1,100 separate grant awards that are currently active within this space. As far as kind of the way that we tend to approach this, we usually go from our oldest funds to our newest funds, specifically referencing that our oldest funds are going to be those that are kind of primary in terms of wanting to make sure our LEAs are aware of those expenditure dates and using those first, noting that the future funds will have additional timeline. So in terms of the update related to the CARES and the coronavirus relief funds, again, these were delivered to the field between May and September of 2020. We like to just call out that the ESSER 1 and Gear 1 due date is rapidly approaching. It seems like September 30th, 2022 is far away, but it's actually not. And the reason I say that is because, as we'll get into a little bit later, we do require full documentation related to these reimbursement requests. So as our LEAs do have expenditures, we encourage you to submit them so that if we do have questions related to that documentation, especially in regards to the fact that many of you have had significant changes from the time you submitted your original plans to now, that we have a chance to work through those pieces before that September 30th, 2022 deadline. So to give you a sense of where we are as a greater community, you'll note that as far as our ESSER 1 funds go, we are over 93% reimbursed to the LEAs of the eligible awards. For the 10% base, this again are the awards that came through the State Board of Education to those who would not have received an ESSER award based on the federal distribution for Title I Part A. We're at a little close to 89%, a little under, related to total amount that's been requested for reimbursement. Gear 1 is significantly lower, and I'll just call out Gear 1 because I think it's one that's sometimes gets a little lost in the shuffle of some of the other more larger scale awards we have. As a friendly reminder, Gear 1 is the Governor's Education and Emergency Relief Fund. This was authorized under previous Governor Gary Herbert and specifically speaks to plans that were submitted by LEAs for reimbursement of services specific to two student populations. One, students who are in special education, and two, students who are at risk of academic failure. This is one where, because it is a very specific student group that needs to be served, we are seeing that some slightly lower reimbursement rates. We're a little over 54% in terms of that. So just kind of calling attention to Gear 1. It does expire on September 30th of next year, and we just want to make sure it doesn't get lost in kind of some of the greater awards that are coming in subsequent slides. We will also note that in in terms of the actual number of LEAs that have been fully reimbursed, for our 90%, we're at 96 of the 128 LEA awards who have received their full reimbursement, and 38 of the 48 in terms of those that received from the state reserve base. So thank you to those of you who have fully expended your awards. I appreciate it. It definitely allows us to move into the ESSER 2 space with you with confidence that we're not leaving federal funds on the table. As a friendly reminder related to the CARES funding, CARES funding is eligible for equitable services. This is the only set of funding that is eligible for equitable services. So for those districts that serve non-public school partners with equitable services, we just like to friendly remind everyone that transfer of federal funds or public funds to non-public schools is not allowed. So you cannot cut them a check specific to a series of services or goods that they're planning to buy. The LEA actually has to do the procurement of the services and or goods and agrees to those as part of the consultation process. If you do have questions about equitable services related to ESSER 1 or Gear 1, I have included Val Murdoch's information. She's up in our title programs. Happy to provide you with additional guidelines related to that. As far as round 2 goes, this is again the Coronavirus Relief Supplemental Award that was received in late December of 2020. And this is where the ESSER 2 and Gear 2 lives. Those funds need to be expended by September 30th, 2023. One more year from the CARES, and therefore the 2 related to both of these awards. ESSER 2 key points that we like to just highlight for the greater community. Again, these were awarded in April of 2021. This was the bumpy one where we actually had all of our LEAs submit their plans, and then we had legislative action that limited some of the federal use cases by creating a reverse match related to if an LEA chose to spend towards capital or HVAC. So because of that, we reissued the plans, and so final awards came through in April and May of this year. As a part of that, the majority of LEAs are choosing to spend their money in the following 3 categories that are highlighted up there: addressing accelerated learning, oftentimes through summer school, after school, and additional kind of intensive high dosage tutoring efforts, purchasing educational technology. This is everywhere from software to hardware to connectivity and all of the different components that fall within that category. And then implementing summer and supplemental after school activities were the key 3 areas that we saw the majority of the LEA spending this particular award on. We will note that for ESSER 2, an LEA is not able to access their ESSER 2 funds for reimbursement until they've completely exhausted their ESSER 1 funds as a part of this process. I will also note that is not the case for ARP ESSER when we get to that one, just to make it different and exciting. So in terms of that last piece, we'll also call out that there are no equitable services required for ESSER 2 or Gear 2. So in that case, if you do have non-public schools that you work with in that space who are saying, great, like where's my next opportunity? You need to let them know that they are working directly with us here at USBE through the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools program. It's posted on our website under Coronavirus Relief, and we have already made over 22 awards to some of our non-public schools related to that program. So if they have any questions, send them to us. We are here to help. In terms of reimbursement, we would expect these to be lower, again, based on the fact that you can't access reimbursement for ESSER 2 until you fully exhausted ESSER 1. And with that, we feel very confident in the reimbursement rates that they are at as of this moment, noting both the time frame from point of award to now, as well as that ESSER 1 requirement. So you can see for the ESSER 2, we're reimbursed at a little over 17% of the total award. And then for the ESSER 2 base, we're a little over 20% related to the total awards that have been made to the field. We do have several LEAs that have been fully reimbursed related to these awards, 7 of 128 in the 90%, and then 4 of 46 in the 10% base. As far as additional awards that we would call out related to this second tranche of funding, the Year 2 award, this is the second round of the Governor's Education Emergency Relief Fund. Again, a smaller award. It's a little over $12 million total going to our LEAs. It was funded based on the LEA percentage of population they serve for special education and at-risk students. However, Year 2 is allowed to be spent on any of the allowable ESSER 2 expenses. So different than Year 1, which is only able to serve those specific subpopulations, Year 2 is flexible in terms of being able to be used to meet the needs of the greater community. So keep that in mind as part of it. I will note that we have reopened the application for Year 2 at the request of some of our community members all the way through December 3rd. So if you're looking to get away from your family after Thanksgiving and you're thinking Year 2 application in Utah Grants Management, that's your moment. We'll also call out that the governor did award a specific subgrant to the University of Utah Reading Clinic. This is going to be, again, for services for expanded student and family offerings related to literacy needs, and we're administering that here at USBE. EANS, we've already talked about, like I said, 22 schools have been awarded with opportunities for equitable services, totaling a little over $16.5 million. Round 3. So this is the current kind of space that most of our LEAs have been in with us over the past couple months related to the American Rescue Plan Act. Again, as a friendly reminder, for ESSER ARP, as well as this secondary EANS program, the funds must be spent by September 30th, 2024. So the dates go: CARES is September 30th, 2022. The Supplemental CRISA Award is September 30th, 2023. ARP, September 30th, 2024. When we provide those dates, we do include the Tidings Amendment to make sure that you are just super clear on this is the date. And it's not plus or minus 12 months. The dates on the slides are accurate and what you should be following and planning for. As far as the American Rescue Plan Act goes, the state received over $615 million in terms of providing support for K-12 education in response to COVID-19. As a part of that, I always call out our state reserve, which has always been the remaining 10%. Specific to the American Rescue Plan is different than the previous state reserves. So in this specific case here at USBE, we're required to spend 5% of the total award, not 5% of the state reserve, but of the total award, specific to addressing accelerated learning with a project at a statewide level. We have had discussions about potential state-funded business cases that have been presented by board members in the November study session, and we would expect our board members to act on those cases and obligate those funds at the upcoming December 2nd board meeting. So at that time, we should know more specifically what explicitly the state is going to be offering and how those funds are going to be distributed. I will note, just for everyone here, as staff at USBE, we have strongly encouraged our board members to look at existing programs that already have applications that are on file for LEAs as a potential use case related to this, as opposed to creating something that's brand new. So we've just noted that, you know, I think everyone's kind of at wit's end in terms of another application due to COVID-19 relief funding. And so we're encouraging them to really look and target some of the existing infrastructure and systems that have already been built out by our local LEAs, as opposed to brand new. One example of that would be, you'll also note that the State Reserve had to put 1% towards evidence-based summer enrichment and 1% towards comprehensive after school. Those were awarded in a competitive fashion, and those awards were made in October. We will note that there are existing additional LEA plans in the after school space that got funding for summer, but didn't for after school because we ran out of that money faster. We're encouraging our board members to consider potentially using some of the dedicated state reserve to fund those additional plans in terms of providing additional opportunities related to more comprehensive year-round services. Clearly, we'll know more after the December board meeting, but that's kind of where we're headed as an agency in terms of recommendations at this time. As far as an update on where we are with plan approval, as of October 20th, we had received 170 LEA plans. 132 have been approved. We're actually over the 150 mark at this point. 30 LEAs plans for in revision. We're under 20 in terms of how many LEAs are still working on some of those technical changes. I will note for our LEAs that are in revision, they're very minor changes that we're asking for. It's usually a question of a missing signature, seeking for a budget adjustment, because I appreciate the new budget table can be a little confusing. We need at least 20% in that 01 required 20% category. So little changes like that are really what we're working on here. There's no like existing plans that are outstanding where it's like that's not an allowable use case, or we have concerns in that space from a programmatic level. Additionally, we will note that there are LEAs that waived their opportunity for ARP ESSER funds. We did see that mainly from LEAs that were receiving from the base, the 190,000. I appreciate that there are questions about capacity and needs related to COVID-19, as well as accepting funds and the reporting requirements that come with that. So we're aware of those concerns and issues and clearly support LEAs making the decision that's best for them. So this is one that on the screen doesn't resonate very well, but is a reference in the future, may be of interest. So you'll see here that this specifically talks about the number of LEAs that spent in each category. As opposed to the chart, I think the most helpful is the list on the right-hand side of the screen, because they're listed in order of prevalence. So you'll see that the number one use case, aside from the required 20%, is that our LEAs are still continuing to put more funds towards addressing accelerated learning needs for students. The second most prevalent use case for ARP in the LEA plans was purchasing of educational technology. The third was capital improvements, which does include HVAC, which again was a new allowance that was not previously authorized by our state legislature for ESSER 2. And then 4 is providing mental health services and supports. So we do see the majority of efforts from the LEAs in those 4 key areas related to the majority of their budgets, and being most prevalent here in Utah. Another fun fact that we will share is that our LEAs are required clearly to spend 20% of their awards on addressing disrupted learning, as we call it in Utah, accelerated learning due to COVID-19 disruption. And so we actually see that LEAs are spending significantly more than that required threshold, over 33%, in terms of being able to address that specific need. That's in addition to specific efforts that are targeted under after school and summer learning that are categorized separately. In terms of after school and summer learning funding, we already touched on this, but USBE did issue a competitive grant application in the summer related to these, and has actually taken action to award over $12 million in competitive grants to LEA partnerships with community-based organizations or local businesses. Was a piece of feedback we received from some of our rural partners who didn't feel they had as much access to community-based organizations. We were able to expand it to include businesses so that all of our LEAs felt like this was something they could apply for. These awards are approved and are currently being loaded into the Utah Grants Management System. I know summer learning is there, and I think after school is there or will be there very soon. And so for that purpose, because the plans have already been approved, you're just uploading your plans and populating your budget before that award is active, and then you can start seeking reimbursement related to those expenditures. There is an upcoming memo. It's been coming for a couple weeks now, but we keep experiencing more LEA questions that we're adding to the memo. And so this is specific to paid leave. So we have had a lot of community questions related to, can ESSER funds be used to address leave due to COVID-19 protocols? Some examples of that would be if you have a teacher who is exposed to COVID-19 and needs to quarantine, can the ARP ESSER funds be used related to paying that teacher their full salary if they'd already exhausted their available sick leave that was already available to them? So for what it's worth, that answer is tentatively yes. It does require the LEA to have some policies in place for how that's being documented on your side, but we'll provide a memo with kind of those specific details moving forward. We've also had some questions related to being able to use funding related to some of the needs for signing bonuses. Again, this memo will contain additional information related to that. We do have structures and policies related to those bonuses because bonuses are not allowable under ESSER unless they're specifically related to COVID. And that's where we're providing the guidance of how you draw that connection related to potentially using some of the funds to recruit talent for some of these areas that are experiencing serious market pressures. So more information coming. That will come to all the BAs from Deputy Scott Jones, who will be the individual who issues the memo. Capital projects reminder. Okay, so we weren't in this space until ARP ESSER, so it's kind of still in the new category because it is a recent authorization. In federal guidance, we're required as an agency to explicitly approve a project plan related to any procurement that's over $5,000 for a single item and or a capital improvements effort that would require some sort of kind of building permit related to the changes being made. We do have an application available on our website. This is outside the grants management system and in addition to your plan. We're basically asking you to draw the very specific connection to the capital expenditure project to COVID-19, demonstrating a timeline that it will be achievable before that September 30th, 2024, because that is the final date that you can, expend funds and still be eligible for reimbursement. And we really don't want you on the hook for additional project costs beyond that point. And where you certify that you'll follow federal Davis-Bacon requirements as dictated by this code. So this is something where once you complete that form, the form itself contains the email, which is one of our leads, Jessica, with the CARES team. You send it to her. We review it as an agency team. We have a meeting every couple of business days, and then we'll get you back a formal response. So you have that for your records and feel confident in moving forward with that. Reminders for the reimbursement process, everyone's favorite. So, reimbursement requests timing. So, USBE encourages LEAs to submit reimbursement requests as the funds are expended at the LEA level. I say that in a very public fashion as well as printed on the screen because USBE had an audit finding related to our ESSER 1 and our GEAR 1 funds, and that finding was specifically stated that LEAs were not requesting reimbursement often enough related to the expenditures, despite the fact that we made quite the case for all of you in terms of the need related to expending the state coronavirus relief funds because those were expiring in December, and we appreciated that would be the priority, not ESSER 1 and GEAR 1. Our pleas did not get us anywhere. So with that, as part of our actionable response, here I am encouraging you to please submit your reimbursements in a timely fashion so we can check that box. Okay, as far as the general ledger component goes, so for the purposes of the COVID-19 relief funds, as we've previously discussed, the funds themselves have been deemed high risk. So there is not a subset of LEAs that has one set of rules and another set of LEAs that has another set of rules. All COVID-19 funds and awards are treated the same for every single LEA within the state of Utah, and they are following the reimbursement guidelines that are on the screen that have been previously shared since November of 2020. So we are looking for a detailed general ledger, not journal entries. It can be a detailed ledger though. So I've heard some questions about it can't be a ledger of any kind. No, that's not true. It can, it just needs to include detail as is described below. So we're looking for two components. You need to document who's being paid for services with time and effort related to it being an allowable use case related to salaries and benefits. And then underneath, in terms of the document, we're looking for details, not that you spent $500 at Amazon, but you specifically purchased hand sanitizer, cleaning wipes totaling $500. It's really for us to be able to validate that the reimbursements that are coming your way are not something that is going to come back up in an audit setting, and that you as well as USBE would be at risk of having to repay. So this is our due diligence related to the speed at which these awards have come out, as well as the ever-changing nature of COVID. Updates. In addition, at the direction of agency leadership and in partnership with your COVID members, USBE is not reimbursing for food of any kind with COVID-19 relief funds, including beverages, candy, snacks, or meals, except as necessary for parent involvement activities to encourage attendance of parents or expanded CNP costs in alignment with Title I allowances. I will provide one additional caveat. They are allowable for per diem related to professional development travel within the state and federal guidelines as well. We've gotten a lot of requests for instructional Diet Coke. And although I'm sure there are definitely use cases, it's not super on solid ground in terms of being in response to COVID-19. So no more instructional Diet Coke. And just make sure that if you're asking for those food related expenses, that they clearly fall within one of these allowable categories. Revision to plans through reimbursement. So again, clearly the landscape changed significantly from when we started this to where we are today. We originally had a component of $67 million in CARES that then became plus $274 million in the second award, then became plus $615 million in ARP. So noting that we do support LEAs in making changes to their plans to be able to reflect the current state of COVID-19, the needs you're experiencing from your teachers and your students. There are two ways to seek revision. The first is to be able to just do a budget revision, as you would in Utah grants management. That budget revision, depending on how much money you're moving between categories, gives you an opportunity in that narrative to include, this is what we're shifting to, and here's how it aligns with COVID. You can call that out in that process if you're doing it on the front end. If it's something where you're making a change, so let's say you were originally budgeting for salaries related to expanding to more paraprofessionals. You haven't been able to find those paraprofessionals. So now you're shifting those salaries to be more specific to paying, let's say, your teachers for additional services they're providing to develop online work outside of contract hours. Fine, you can actually submit as part of your reimbursement because it's still salaries. That doesn't trigger like the need to do a budget revision. And so you can submit a response to the 3 federal questions that I'll go through here in a moment as a supplement to your reimbursement request. Those 3 questions are, how is it related to COVID? Number 2, is it aligned to one of the existing use cases? And then number 3, is it necessary and reasonable in terms of uniform grant guidance? And so that's where you just get a chance to document those pieces. We'll consider that and then keep that in our files related to your plan ongoing. But those are the 2 mechanisms you have to make those changes, and know as USBE staff, we support you in that process. In addition to that, we've also established here at the agency, which we shared with the field back in October, an Lea Appeals Process. So Traditionally, the process is that the COVID-19 program and finance team through the grants management reviews your reimbursement request, provides you feedback or asks for clarification related to specific items, and you go through that before you receive the reimbursement through our traditional mechanisms. With that said, if you go through that process and you feel like, no, we're making a very clear case related to a use case for COVID-19, and it's being rejected, and I would like it, further reviewed, you can ask for it to be brought to the USB COVID-19 program finance meeting that happens every Monday. And so that's where we review individual use cases that we feel whether we've identified as staff kind of fall within the gray, or aren't clearly and explicitly called out in any of the federal guidance documents. So an LEA is welcome to make that request if you've had something that's been rejected or you have additional questions or want additional consideration. Once there's an outcome or consensus from that meeting, we would communicate that back to an LEA. There is a second appeal that an LEA may place that takes it all the way to the USBE superintendency level. So that's where they will, again, kind of weigh in related to what staff's feedback was, what the LEA's feedback was, and then kind of make a final call. We've had one LEA go through this entire process. They're the ones who helped us establish this. And so we feel really confident that it gives LEAs that opportunity to be able to seek additional consideration related to individual expenses as they may exist due to COVID-19. Last but not least, transparency and reporting. As far as ESSER and GEAR reporting goes, so draft reporting requirements have been made available by the U.S. Department of Education all the way back in August of 2021 this year. So these are revised from the previous year. We, as well as many other states, gave significant critical feedback. Specifically, they were seeking at the time in the draft reporting requirements for both SEAs and LEAs to not only report reimbursed costs, but to report obligated costs. And we were like, no, we do not have that. At least readily available and quickly available to pull, and especially because they were looking for it to be delineated by categories that weren't specifically the federal categories that were originally released in the application. We were like, this is a mess. So we gave better feedback than this is a mess, along with the other states. And they have released a second round of draft reporting requirements late in October. And so as a part of that, they're still seeking public comment all the way through the end of November before they will most likely finalize those reporting guidelines. Once we have those available, similar to last year, we will release a single reporting tool that pulls in those federal reporting requirements as well as the reporting requirements requested by our partners at the governor's office and LFA. So we can do just a single data pull related to all of the requests that are upcoming, both for the federal level and the state level, state board level, all of the above. Again, we would love to release this as soon as possible. Our release date is truly contingent on when the U.S. Department of Education finalizes those reporting guidelines. If you are interested in seeing the draft reporting guidelines, I'm happy to share those with the greater group, or you can find them through the Federal Register, which is where they're posted. As far as ARP ESSER plan requirements, one other friendly reminder, the school reopening policies and a copy of the full plan has to be available on your public-facing website. The U.S. Department of Education has requested those links and is publishing them on their website related to those efforts. So if you submit a reimbursement and we do not have an active or accurate link from you, you will hear back from our staff that says, hey, just following up, has that been able to be posted yet before we move forward with processing that reimbursement, because it is a federal requirement related to the awarding of the funds. If you have questions about that, please don't hesitate to let us know. I know some of our LEAs who are still in revision for some of those technical pieces may have held off on posting. And so, but then again, if you're in that space, you're probably not requesting reimbursement yet, now are you? So next, the state transparency emergency dashboard. We do have a dashboard available to the greater public related to these funds. This allows them to go LEA by LEA to see what awards have come through, as well as where you are related to reimbursement. We update this quarterly, and so the data set that's currently posted is from September of this year. We'll do another update before legislative session to be able to show where LEAs are related to the award values, what they've requested for reimbursement, all within that federal relief sphere. Legislative transparency. So this is kind of nearing the end, but something that I wanted to make sure that all of you were aware of. So for all of the business cases that public education is advancing through the governor's office process, as well as to our State Board of Education for consideration of prioritization, USBE staff have been asked to consider if COVID-19 relief funding could be used to address that need. That is the number one question being asked related to any public education request is, why didn't you use COVID funding for this if it's a need? So because of that, we at the state board are trying to be proactive and are preparing a one-pager that captures how K-12 education has obligated those funds to address the different use cases like educational technology and student-based mental health to be ready for legislative session. We encourage our LEAs to also be prepared to answer that question, which is, if you are a part of a conversation that's asking for additional funding related to capital expenditures, help them understand how you used your existing funds to meet the needs of your students related to learning, and that's why you still need additional state funds related to potentially capital projects necessary at the school level. It's a question that all of our LEAs will be asked if and when they engage with legislators, and we just want to give you a friendly fall heads up before you're in January and that question becomes a barrier to you. If you're ready with, here's what we spent our plan on, here are our key bullet points, you should be good to go, but it helps in terms of then making a case for other needs. Auditors. So Office of the Inspector General is currently engaged in a data request specific to a subset of LEAs for ESSER dollars related to educational technology, as well as a second request for LEAs on how they're meeting the needs of traditionally underserved populations. For those LEAs that have been selected from Utah, we've communicated that with them, so you know if that's you. And so you would be expecting more outreach directly from OIG related to those inquiries. We always provide them the 2 points of contact that are in the Utah Grants Management System related to who they need to reach out to in terms of follow-up. So please know we're using that information in that way, as well as using that to notify you as well. State auditors. We have been notified, similar to last year, that they will be doing an audit of the K-12 COVID-19 relief funds for us again this year, as they did last year. We provide them access to the Utah Grants Management System, so they have access to everything that you have submitted to us that we've taken through that process. As a part of that, last year we didn't see a lot of additional outreach at the LEA level because the records at USBE are comprehensive based on the nature of the reimbursement requests. With that said, if there are follow-up questions, again, we use the contact information in Utah Grants Management for them to be able to do that additional outreach. We would expect them to begin this process in December, if not January, related to completing that audit for the previous fiscal year. Yay, COVID, as we always say. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come and provide you an update here today related to the COVID-19 relief funds. Please know that from myself, as well as my team, which is Jessica Kerr and Sarah Harward, we really do appreciate all of the efforts being made, especially on the financial side, in terms of managing all of these different awards within these tight timeframes and really doing rapid response related to additional needs as you see them due to COVID-19. If you ever have a question, whether it's related to an award, a reimbursement, an upcoming reporting requirement, please don't hesitate to reach out. We really are here to help and have a lot of empathy for the current workload as it stands and are here to help you. So don't hesitate to reach out. My contact information is on the screen and included in the slide deck. And with that, I will turn it back over to Sam. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I will say on the Diet Coke front, the school that I came from, Mazer Prep, has had some luck with just requesting parents to go to Costco and bring in some Diet Coke. So they've got an ice machine set up in the break room, and from what I hear, it's still well stocked. But thank you so much, Sarah, for you and your team and everything that you're doing. If there are any other questions for Sarah, please reach out, and we appreciate it. So we'll let Dale Frost get connected here to the presenter's link. Dale is, again, our minimum school program administrator and fiscal policy analyst. He loves questions, so shoot those over in the YouTube chat, or if you're in person, come up and use a microphone. So thank you.
Sam, did you want me to move? Am I okay here?
Good.
Okay.
I think we should just be seeing your slides after a bit here, Dell. So
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Dale Frost, minimum school program administrator for the Utah State Board of Education. Happy to be with you this morning. I also function as the fiscal policy analyst. And so, please let me know online if you have a hard time hearing me, and please ask questions throughout. I'm open. Those who are here in the room, please raise your hand and come to a mic, or ask questions in the YouTube chat. And I will try my best to repeat those questions so we all can hear them. I know Sam is monitoring the YouTube chat. So today I wanted to go over 4 kind of topics to update you all on where we are with USBE budget requests, where they stand, both prioritizations, what total amounts requested, and some additional information. Then, the Common Data Committee has finished projections for fiscal 23. That's both property taxes and valuations and enrollment projections. So I'll go over those data, and then go over some mid-year updates, the process. I wanted to, I'm new in this role as a minimum school program administrator, and I've had a lot of questions and folks coming to me with questions about the mid-year update and possible impacts, especially to their kindergarten and grades 1 through 12 program allocations, the WPUs. So I thought it would be helpful to go through those calculations a little bit. And then I've also received a number of kind of recurring questions about allotment memos, and I thought it might be helpful to go over some frequently asked questions. I appreciate all of the LEAs and business officials who have agreed for me to use them as examples. You guys are awesome, and I really appreciate using real world examples rather than just hypotheticals. It's more interesting that way, I think. So again, please chime in with questions at any time. So USBE budget requests, where are we right now? As you know, with Constitutional Amendment G, a number of spending items are now statutory increases, and they will happen in the Executive Appropriations Committee meeting. So if you see that top line, statutory increases, right now we have a placeholder amount. We're finalizing the calculations on what enrollment growth and the WPU value increase will cost. For your information, the inflationary increase, September to September CPI 5-year average is 2.6%. So that's already going to be part of the budget. And then, discussions of a WPU value increase would be above that. And so USDB has requested about $24 million, mostly one-time capital requests. For your information, you may have seen that the budget picture, it looks like there will be some one-time resources available for the state in terms of allocations, and that will be up to the state policymakers. So USB requests above and beyond the statutory increases are $633 million, and I'll go through those in a little more detail. So in October, the board prioritized 11 budget requests, and that is likely to change in the December meeting, and I'll kind of go through but these are the priorities as they stand right now, and I'll kind of go through them very briefly. The WPU value increase would be a 5% increase above the 2.6%. We have a placeholder of $175 million. I will say that if we're able, and that aligns with the JLC priority, that would be a historic increase. We had a historic increase last year. And so that's the number one priority for the board. The at-risk WPU add-on, this would be a faster phase-in of that of those weights, about twice as fast as what was recommended by PEA, the EAC. PEA is the Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee. Sorry, I'm throwing a lot of acronyms out at you. The EAC is the Executive Appropriations Committee. But they are likely to adopt an increase in the weights around 22 million. And so the request from number 2 would be essentially to do 2 years worth of that 10-year phase-in. And all of these business cases, if you go onto Civic Clerk, if you go onto the Utah Board's website, you can go back to previous board meetings and see the specifics for all these business cases. Number 3, critical USB EFTEs. This is about 11 additional FTEs throughout the agency that are being requested. Number 4 would expand BTS art specialists to all elementary schools. And so that's number 4. That our estimate is about. We actually are revising this estimate just slightly down. But it'll be about $12 million is the cost to provide for all those specialists.
Dale, quick
yes.
question.
Yes.
Brent Bills says the current CPI is 6.2%. Why is the inflationary increase so low? Do you have any?
Great question. Brent, the reason why, if House Bill 357 that passed, that was contingent on Constitutional Amendment G, is a 5-year rolling average of the CPI. And so that 6.2% is part of that, but it was much lower in previous years. And so that bumps it up, but that's why it's lower. So it was, in the low 2s, high 1%. And then you're right, it was much higher this year.
Let us know if you need any additional clarification, Brent. Thank you.
All right, so the 5th priority for the board, and we're trying our best to work with the field broadly and your needs. So if you see on the right-hand side, it says for a couple of these that they align with the JLC priority. That's the Joint Legislative Committee, which is a group of multiple organizations that represent the needs for the school districts throughout the states, and that I believe includes, and just so you know, these slides will be made available afterwards. I apologize, wearing 2 caps right now. I'm barely treading water, so I had to get these last minute. So we didn't get these out as soon as I wanted. The curricular fees also aligns with the ideas of the JLC priority. We're trying our best to understand that, and we hope to have that continued dialogue with you as a field to understand. So this was an example of that where so the original amount was $50 million. We aligned to that. And then we went back and looked at, curricular fees. There are certain co-curricular fees that are during the school day. And if the intention really is to eliminate or significantly reduce fees during the school day, the amount would need to be higher. And it's probably and very soon, the USBE will be presenting these data to the Education Interim Committee. It's about $54 million. And so $55 million, we increased that request amount and then changed the language just slightly just to be clear that the intention is to significantly reduce curricular fees. There are a lot of questions as to how that would be distributed and what those what that looks like, and those questions haven't been answered at this point. But the intention would be to significantly reduce the fiscal impacts of those reduced fees for the local level. So moving on to, and I apologize, I said 11. They actually removed one of the prioritized business cases, so now there are 10. And talk to me later if you want to talk more about where we are in the economies of scale work. So that has been, we're working on that over the next year. So number 6 is to increase the salaries for key areas, key positions within USBE. We're having a very difficult time recruiting and retaining talent here. And that's the 6th priority. Number 7 would pay for both a system and staff to support continuous improvement efforts locally. And this would be to help you as a field know which of your schools are near identification for targeted improvements, where it's my understanding that sort of data is not readily available. And then we have one person who's overseeing a lot of the continuous improvement work, but the idea would be to establish the center to significantly increase that work in the technical assistance to help LEAs. Number 8 would be to phase in full-day kindergarten over 3 years. And that the way that would work would be to fund about $22 million into OEK, optional enhanced kindergarten, for 2 years. And then by giving LEAs time in year 3 to offer full day kindergarten to all parents that want it. Parents would need to have a half day option, is the intention of that. And then in that year 3, kindergarten students, instead of generating the 0.55 WPUs, would generate 1.0 WPUs is the idea there. Number 9 would be a scholarship program using one-time funds to address our special education teacher shortage. And number 10 would add additional funds to the pupil transportation to from program at $5 million. So those are the priorities. I'd be happy to answer more questions. I can go into a lot of detail, but I'd suggest you go onto the board's website to read about these business cases. If you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to me. And so why do I think that these priorities are likely to change? This is just a visual. This is not actual data. Let me be clear about that. But I provided this visual to the board because you'll see here, it's dummy data, and these are not actual amounts in business cases. But we are going through the process right now with the board members. So board member Hansen suggested or proposed a new process by which each board member is identifying his or her top 10 priorities through a survey. And then for the December meeting, we will provide the data, and you will see all of their priorities, and then the consensus priorities, and then that it will be up to the board on what to do with those. So you'll see that in the December meeting. And it will be interesting to see how that impacts their priorities. Just wanted to give you an update on that. We've not gone through this process before, and it will, so the first time board members will see other board members' ratings will be in the board backups that you will soon see when those are posted as well. So stay tuned for that. And then I'm quickly just putting on the list, excuse me, let's see, where are we? Yeah, these are all of the business cases and the amounts. I'm not going to spend much time on them. I'd recommend you go and look on the website. We will also be sending out the full budget tracker and summaries of all of these. I have a number of backup documents that will be sent out that support this presentation. So the last thing I wanted to show you, why should you care about USBE's budget request? You know, the board, LEAs, you have your own priorities. I did some analysis, and this was for the board, and just wanted to show you that there is a lot of power in coordinating as a field and working with the board. This was just since I've been tracking these data. So the top table here, you can see the total amounts, and it matters pre-COVID and post-COVID because of having to retract all of that funding. And so I measured pre-COVID because that's a better measure of what actually came out of the legislature as to how effective from a lobbying standpoint to get policymakers to allocate funds towards public education. So you can see here that in 2020, 634 was requested by USBE. In 2021, 762. The overall amounts approved, this is new funding above and beyond the base, was 408 million before COVID. It was scaled back significantly because of uncertainty, and then 481 last year. What does that mean for these cases? You know, I spent some time talking about prioritized cases. You know, before COVID struck, 91% of prioritized cases were funded in whole or in part, and 79% of non or all cases. So there were about 40 cases, 30 to 40 this year. And I just wanted to show you that it's a lot of work doing this and working together, but it does create good outcomes for the field in terms of new resources to better serve students. So I thought you might find that interesting. So that's all that I have for budget requests. I don't know if there are any other questions on that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to CDC, Common Data Projections. The CDC is not the Centers for Disease Control. Luckily, you know, that work is a lot more complicated, though our work sometimes is very complicated too. But when we say CDC in this context, we mean the Common Data Committee. So what is the Common Data Committee? Well, it's made up of folks who staff the Legislative Fiscal Analyst's Office, the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, USBE, and the Utah State Tax Commission. And the point of the CDC, and having worked in multiple other states, I'm very grateful for this kind of process so that we're not bickering about what is reality or what are the data. For example, in Arizona, on the revenue front, the governor and the legislature have their own revenue projections, and they fight over what is the right revenue projection before you even fight over what to spend it on. And so luckily, we at least can come to a consensus and say, this is what's available to spend, and then you can fight all you want on where it goes. But and the same thing applies to the largest part of the state budget, which is the minimum school program and public education funding in general. And so the work here is to come up with consensus revenue estimates for local revenues and enrollment projections and WPU estimates. Is the when we say CDC process, that's what we mean. So all of these data we'll be providing to you, and so so this first part, these are our consensus property tax valuation estimates. So for next year, we are estimating about 17.6 million in new revenue growth from the basic tax rate is, I believe, and then about 9.3% in local real property, and then smaller increments of growth for centrally assessed and personal property. And so if you have more questions about that, we'll be sharing these data by school district. And so you can look at that. I just wanted to give you an update that those were made, and those factor into our projections on the WPU side. But first, enrollment projections. So we go through a fairly intense process to identify consensus enrollment projections by school district and then by charter school. And then the specific data, again, will be provided in the backups for you all. Overall, the CDC projects that the system will grow just by 0.54%. And the reason being is that the main reason why is that the kindergarten classes are smaller than the graduating classes for a lot of LEAs. And that's because the birth rates continue to go down. And so our positive growth is because of in-migration from people moving into the state that makes up for that. And it's just very slow growth. And so you'll see some school districts have, some minor increases in enrollment. Overall, some have some minor decreases in enrollment. Those are our projections, and these projections factor in to the legislative estimates for fiscal 23 for WPUs. So you'll see these data, and let me know if you have questions about them. I'm showing all the school districts and the charters as a whole here, but I have that broken out for all LEAs that will be going out in the backups. Question, Sam, just on process. Are we emailing those out? Are we posting all these data points?
We'd plan on posting these on our training tab on the website, and we can send out an email when those are posted. But if you would like those sooner, shoot an email over to Dale or I, and I'll put those emails in the chat.
For those of you who've worked with me, I really try to err on the side of transparency, and I in no means pretend to be infallible, but I find that it's helpful for folks that, I'm trying to be as transparent as we can be with the processes to the extent possible, so that folks, A, to build trust, and B, so that you guys can operate as effectively with the best information that we can provide at this point. All right, so that's CDC projections. Any questions in the chat on that? Okay. Mid-year updates. Okay, so with the minimum school program, which is over $3 billion of the $6.5 billion system, and that is the basic school program related to basic program and the voted and board local levy programs. There are three major kind of milestones by which you learn your allocations by program. And this is very familiar to you all. The legislative estimates are made very soon after the budget gets passed by the legislature. The legislature passes it in late March. Very soon thereafter, we provide our legislative estimates. And those often are based, especially those that are enrollment based, on projections. Those CDC projections that we provided before really drive a lot of the legislative estimates. So we're coming up on the mid-year update. And the mid-year update takes into account actual data that we didn't have back in March and April. Primarily, that is prior year ADM. We now know 21 ADM. We now know October 1 counts, and we just recently got the November 15th cactus updates. those factor into multiple programs throughout the minimum school program. And then the final updates that occur in April to May primarily have to do with, we then have final property tax collection information to update allocations for school districts. There probably are some others, and I'm learning as we go. I've worked in this at a high level, but not in the operational trenches. So I have not gone through the legislative estimates or final updates in detail, and I'm learning in excruciating detail what the mid-year updates are all about right now. So I was going to share with you just a few data, because we have calculated some of them, some of the most important pieces, and then kind of give you an update on what will happen. Actually, let me go back one more thing. So my plan and what you should expect in your allotments is that for the November allotments, the basic school program updates will occur. Actually, I think I have that. That will come later, and then December will be the programs within related basic and vote on board. Just wanted you to know on that front. Okay, so October 1, overall, October 1 was up from the previous year, which is what we expected. That a lot of students came back. We're still dealing with COVID issues, and overall the system had grown. So you can see just in the grades 1 through 12 program, we're calculating about a 7,000 WPU increase in just for the grades 1 through 12 program. And that's because of our prior ADM and October 1 enrollment counts. I was going to go through a couple examples because I've had a lot of folks. So there are a number of LEAs that are in unique circumstances right now. Some have never had declines, and they're dealing with declines in enrollment. Some have, in their experiences, haven't had increases, and they are dealing with increases. So a lot of questions on how do the K-12 formula, how do those formulas work? And my hope is that you can, let me go through a couple examples. And again, I got permission from the BAs and the leaders from these LEAs to go through these data in detail for you all. They're publicly available, but I'm not trying. I really do appreciate them being willing for me to showcase these actual calculations in a little detail, because if I were in your shoes, I would want to know, if I knew my ADM in October 1, I would like to know what are the WPUs. And for a lot of folks, that feels like this black box where it's like something happens and we know it goes up or down, but I want to take away some of that mystery here so that you could calculate those yourself. So let me go through a couple examples here. So this is looking specifically at Uinta School District. Jason Johnson from Uinta School District was in the boat where they've had slow declines for a few years, and this is the first time where they had increases. So we wanted to understand what that would impact their WPUs for the mid-year update. So if you look here, this is how we calculate for the legislative estimate side. Remember the timing of this. This happens in March and April. The year isn't over. We don't know ADM. October 1 clearly hasn't occurred. So what do? Well, funding for the K and grades through 12 program are based on ADM, but we have to use projections. And so if you look here, you can see Uinta's data for kindergarten and grades 1 through 12 for October 19 and October 1, 2020, and then October 1, 2021, which was the CDC projections that were created last year. Based on those projections, we estimated that, looking at the data, there was a pretty significant drop in kindergarten and a 3.4% drop. This was between 20 and 21 for grades 1 through 12, and then estimated that it would be around a little more than 1% in from 21 to 22. So how does that play out here? Well, what we do, as you know, kindergarten ADM generates 0.55 WPUs. For school districts, one ADM generates one WPU. And we knew the 2020 ADM at that point. And what you do is you take those growth rates and you apply them to estimate 21 and 22 ADM. So what you do, summing those up, our estimates for Uinta were in 21, the WPUs would be 6,250, and in 22 would be 6,177. And you've heard of this hold harmless. I want you to actually see how that's working. What we do is we take the higher of our projected. So in this case, Uinta was funded not at the 6,177 projected, but at the 6,250, and that's the legislative estimates for them. But then how does that shake out with the mid-year update? That was the question that Jason Johnson had for me. So this slide here shows you, we were estimating a little over a 1% decline in both kindergarten grades 1 through 12. There was actually a large increase in kindergarten, which is what we saw overall between October 1, 2020 and October 1, 2021, and then a 1.8% increase in grades 1 through 12 enrollment. This was for Uinta. So how does that factor in on the WPU side? So I'm just going to focus on grades 1 through 12, for example, and compare and contrast here. So we estimated that originally in legislative estimates, 5931 would be the WPUs in 22. It was actually 6,052. So a little over 100 WPUs in grades 1 through 12. This is showing you overall what happened. So what the final calculation here shows that they went up. So again, you're looking at the higher of the two estimates, and the 21 now is based on actual ADM. The 22 is still an estimate because we don't have 22 ADM, but it's based on actual October 1 to October 1. And so in this example, Uinta's K-12 WPUs went from 6,250 to 6,331. And that was because of both the hold harmless and the interplay of those. You've heard of the term prior year plus growth, probably. So it's always based on ADM, but then we apply those growth rates, and then if that produces additional WPUs, we'll give you the higher of that. And so this won't change for Uinta. They'd still get these WPUs. Even with the final update. Any questions on this? It was helpful to do this kind of one-on-one, but I thought it might be helpful to do this broadly so people can see, okay, this is how WPUs are calculated for your largest programs. I'm going to do one more example here on the charter school side, and I appreciate the folks at Walden School letting us do this, and I'm not going to go into as much detail because it's very similar on the charter side, except that the WPUs are slightly different. You'll see because the calculations are slightly different. We still take, so this is the legislative estimates. We still look at growth rates between 21 and estimated for 21 and 22. Kindergarten WPUs are the same as districts, but then in charter schools, the ADM generates 0.9 WPUs for grades 1 through 6, and then 0.99 for grades 7 through 8, and 1.2 for grades 9 through 12. That's a statutory framework that way. So for Walden, our estimates were that in 21, our estimated WPUs was 428, in 22 is 427, so they got the 428.8 for K through 12. So what happened? Well, we estimated some slight increases overall of their enrollment, but their enrollments actually that came in October 1 were actually down this year. And so they reached out to me and asked what would be the impacts on the WPU side because of this decline in enrollments. They're kind of the opposite of what Uinta was experiencing this year. So I went through a similar calculation here. And so if you see here, based on the current data that we have, You know, rather than 428 or 427, it went down in 21 to 413. And then our estimate for WPUs in 22 were 389. That shows that decline there. They get the higher of those two. So even though there's probably 30 or 40 students less than that we had projected, their WPUs went down by only 15. And that shows you the hold harmless in action there. I hope that helps. But hopefully you get this. Reach out to me if you have more questions. But this is how we calculate WPUs. You should be able to recreate this. And we will provide all of these calculations by LEA in the backups. Yes.
Question from the chat. How does the hold harmless work over the course of multiple years? With declining enrollment, are you held harmless to actuals from the prior year?
Yes.
Yes.
So the way I would think about it, if you have declining enrollments, you just multiply your WPUs by the respective factor times your prior year ADM. So once you knew your 21 ADM, if you weren't expecting growth this year, you would know your WPUs. The only reason why that would change in the mid-year update is if you saw growth from your October 1. Does that make sense? If there are other questions. So it's not a multiple year hold harmless. It's essentially a 1 year hold harmless every year. And so if you are declining year after year, you will see that as your ADM goes down. But for that 1 year hold harmless, it occurs. This really applied this last year in 21 because of the craziness due to COVID. The hold harmless was a lot larger than we had expected. And that was a greater cost than we had anticipated to the basic school program. Luckily, we put in multiple contingencies for that, and we're able to cover those costs in the basic school program. But when we were closing out 21, it was a little scary. I will say that. So I mentioned before what we're looking to update in the November allotment and the December allotments. I don't pretend that these are an exhaustive list because I still need to go program by program to understand. But these were the programs I knew we were updating for the mid-year update based on kind of those new data points that I showed you. So you should see changes in your November allotment for kindergarten, grades 1 through 12, foreign exchange, NEST, pro staff, CTE, class size reductions, and students at risk. And then the ones I know about in December, since I haven't gone through that, so please, there are probably others, but I know that these will be ones that will be updated, will be ESA, teacher, TSSP, teacher supplies and materials, charter school funding base, and then the voted and board local levy programs. Questions on mid-year updates? Okay, last thing, allotment memo, frequently asked questions. How am I doing on time?
We're cutting into people's breaks, so
So hurry up.
about
Okay.
5 minutes. Thanks.
I'll make this quick. There were three. We're all familiar with the allotment memos. I wanted to show you a little bit about some of the constraints we have from the report and some of the eccentricities that cause some of the questions that are recurring for folks. So here are the three common issues. Payments that aren't included in the allotment memo. So you'll see, hey, it says we got $1 million, and what actually hit our bank account was, $1.1 million. Why? So I'll go through an example of why that commonly occurs. An allotment memo our report can kind of glitch, and you actually can be treated, one LEA can be treated as multiple LEAs, and so you'll have multiple tabs, and you have to sum those up. And so I've seen that as much as 3 tabs, maybe even more. We're trying to fix some of those issues, but they do happen. And then negative amounts, mostly invoices showing up, throwing off your total. So I'll quickly go through these. And again, I had permission from all of these folks. So Dawn from Academica West Academica West said, Utah Virtual Academy, the amount they received was off by $167. Why? Well, let me explain why that occurred. I knew about that. We have to select a date for project end date, programs with a project end date. And we can select a prior year. So what we do is our operating procedures, we choose, and here it actually says August 31st, 2021, because that's what it shows. I just took a screenshot of that. I manually changed that to June 30, 2021. My operating procedure is that we will take the end of the prior fiscal year as the project end date. And so as you know, for federal dates, that can span multiple years for federal programs. For state programs, that tends to end. So, if it was, that would be at the end of the fiscal year. Why does this matter? If we put that further back, you would get much, much longer allotment memos with a whole bunch of zeros, and it's already unwieldy. But what this happened, doing this business rule that we do, there are times where there are payments that don't show up on the allotment memo from prior years. And in this case, so what do I do to find out what those are? We also, at the end of each month, create a treasurer's memo. So these are for the PTIF, the Treasurer's Investment Fund. So going through this process for those who have PTIF accounts, we have to reconcile between the treasurer's memo and the allotment memo. The treasurer's memo is based on all of your payments. The allotment memo sometimes doesn't have all the payments. And so you'll see here's Utah Virtual Academy. I noticed that $167 that's off. And the reason why is because Utah Virtual is an SOEP provider, and we are providing from the 2020 allotment or appropriation for SOEP, and that doesn't show up because the project end date had ended. So what do we do in that case? Well, I take the data that comes from FINET and I plunk it on the bottom of your Excel file down here. In this case, I failed to do that. I missed it, and so this was my response back. I didn't add that information and I failed to do it. I went back and added it and resent it to Dawn to answer that question. So if you see this kind of, if it's off by a certain amount, see if at the bottom of your allotment memo, if there are data. And I try to provide all that data so that you can accurately code it in your systems. So that's issue number one. Multiple tabs. So Lane from Garfield had a discrepancy in his amounts. Why was that? So you can see here, if you look really closely, Garfield is phase code 100 or LEAID 10. You'll see that there are actually two of them. You'll see 100 and 100-2. That's because this is their first allotment memo, and then the system goofed up, and for whatever reason, for the federal mineral lease payment, it treated Garfield as a separate LEA, and so you have to sum those two. So this was the missing payment that he didn't see, and so I pointed it out to him, and then that was able to reconcile for him. So look to see if you have multiple tabs that have your LEA phase code at the bottom of the Excel file, or look at the following pages on the PDF. So that's the third, and I'll quickly go through the last one, negative amounts. So this was Scott from Morgan. They paid back an invoice for a certain program, early intervention funds, and it looked like, and this I've gotten multiple times, it looks like you're charged twice because they pay for it, but what it is that's an accounting for it on the allotment memo, and sometimes it can take months for it to finally show up on the state system. And so I looked there, sure enough, there's the $39,000 that they paid back, and it looks like the amount here, the 1.953, is what what their allotment memo says. And I was aware of this issue. What they actually received was 1.993, and that difference was that invoice. So it's an accounting issue. It's not an actual cash money issue. And so in those cases, if you have a discrepancy, go back and look at what your actual payment is, because It's just our system catching up to account for that. I have not seen a case in which you actually are charged twice, but it does look like that. And I don't know how to overcome some of these system issues. I wish we had better ways to account for that, but that is a frequently asked question here. So those are that was the last thing I wanted to cover. Hopefully that's helpful for you as you're dealing with your staff, that maybe we can give you some tools so you can answer those questions, but still feel free to reach out to me if you have those questions. Here's my contact information, Sam's. Karen McInnes is our research consultant. And then we are hiring for the MSP team of financial analysts 3. That should be showing up on the state website very soon. And we would love to have talented people come our way. Or if you have recommendations for that financial analyst, please let me know. And
Or
with
if
that, I'll
you
answer
would
questions.
like to volunteer to help us interview, we'd love that.
We would love that too. So that will be happening very, very soon. So with that, I will answer any questions. I hope that was helpful for you all.
Okay. Appreciate it, Del. Any other questions from the chat or yes, Craig?
Thank you. Thanks, Dale. I needed that today. Very helpful. Thanks. I just wanted a clarification on the speculation on the WPU increase. So you gave us 2 percentages. You gave us a 2.5, which is the inflationary factor.
2.6, yes.
Okay, sorry. You don't want to drop that 10th, right? And then the other was 5.2.
So the business case would be that would be a 5% increase for a net increase of 7.6 is if that were fully funded. So one is going to happen. That's the 2.6.
Right.
And then the other is a policy decision on how much they want to fund the WPU above and beyond the 2.6.
And that's the amount that the USBE is going after when it comes, is
yes.
requesting. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Craig. Any other questions? Okay, if not, let's meet back at 11:20 a.m., 11:20, and then we'll get, we have Adam Hurd and Michael from the USBE procurement side. Thank you.
Thank you all for your patience as we got this straightened out, just dealing with some technical difficulties. Anyway, so my name is Adam Hurd. I'm here with Michael Iwasaki, and we're both purchasing managers here at USBE. And today we'll be talking about procurement, kind of a procurement 101 for LEAs. Okay, so to start out, so what's the point of public procurement? This always seems like a good place to start. And the Procurement Code actually tells us that. And that's contained in section 63G 6A102. And it states that the underlying purposes and policies of this chapter are to ensure transparency in the public procurement process, to ensure the fair and equitable treatment of all persons who participate in the public procurement process, to provide increased economy in state procurement activities, and to foster effective broad-based competition within the free enterprise system. So you can see that really what it boils down to is creating a transparent, fair, and competitive process for all those involved in the procurement process. So this includes government employees, vendors, and probably most importantly, taxpayers, because we are public stewards of those taxpayer dollars. So we need to ensure that we're using those funds wisely and appropriately and according to the law. So procurement code and rules. So how do the procurement code and administrative rules apply to LEAs? So school districts and charter schools are considered educational procurement units under the procurement code. And what this means is that they're independent procurement units that handle all of their own procurements, and they're not required to go through state purchasing. This is similar to USBE. We're also an independent procurement unit. However, anytime public funds are expended or used to acquire a procurement item, which includes a good, a service, or even a construction project. Compliance with the Utah Procurement Code and applicable administrative rules is required. So although LEAs are independent procurement units like USBE, they're still required to follow code and rule. And so some of you may know that USBE has created some of its own administrative rules regarding procurement, and those are contained in R277-122. However, LEAs are not subject to USBE's procurement administrative rules. Rather, in the Procurement Code in 63G 6A 1031, it states that the Procurement Policy Board is the applicable rulemaking authority for all public schools and charter schools. And the Procurement Policy Board created the rules in R33. So those are the rules that LEAs are subject to, not the USBE specific enacted rules. And also, in addition, LEAs can create their own rules or policies that don't conflict with R33, but any such rules or policies must be stricter, not more lenient, than R33. So just for a simple example, the small purchase threshold, which is currently $1,000, an LEA could make its own rule or policy to reduce that threshold to say $500, but they couldn't increase it to $5,000. So just keep in mind that any rules or policies must be stricter, not more lenient than what's in code and rule. So now there are standard and non-standard procurement processes. And as you can see here, standard procurement processes include quotes, invitation for bids, request for statement of qualifications, and request for proposals. On the other hand, the non-standard procurement processes or exceptions include the acronym AC West, which you may or may not be familiar with, but that stands for award of a contract without engaging in a standard procurement process, or what most people know it as sole source. So an AC West can be awarded based on the following. There are three different award justifications. So there's the sole source, there's transition costs, and then impractical or not in the best interest of the procurement unit. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the sole source procurements, those really should be limited to those procurements that are truly sole sources, meaning there is truly only one vendor that can provide the good or service. This is something that we see pretty frequently at USBE, as I think most procurement units do. That people like to award sole sources when it's not truly a sole source. One example that we see pretty frequently is, with a proprietary system or a copyrighted system or product. We'll get a request to purchase, such a product, and we're told that, this is the only vendor that can provide it. It's a proprietary system. And while that may be the case, you have to keep in mind that, there may be other vendors that provide a similar type of product or a service that, you can't look so narrowly at it as, that we have to use this specific product or service, and only this vendor can provide it because it's something that they created. Look at it as more of the type of product or service that you're looking for, and whether other vendors may be able to provide a similar type of product. Unless there's some specific reason that it has to be this, specific proprietary product, kind of broaden that and look more at the type of procurement that we're looking at rather than this specific product or service. So now looking at the standard procurement process thresholds. As you can see here, there are several different thresholds based on the type of procurement process. So starting with the small purchase, there's the individual procurement item, which the threshold is $1,000. So anything under $1,000 is considered a small purchase and no quotes are required. And then there's the single procurement item threshold, which is $5,000. So just to kind of differentiate between the two of those, So the single procurement item threshold means that the total dollar limit for a single purchase or transaction with all individual items in the procurement being under $1,000 must not exceed $5,000. So in other words, buying many items under $1,000 at one time, but not spending more than $5,000 total in that single purchase. So when every item being purchased is less than $1,000, that includes, any shipping or anything that may be included with the products, is less than 5,000, then you don't have to get quotes. You can simply purchase from the best source, even if it's the only source. Now, keep in mind with small purchases, there is an annual cumulative threshold, which is $50,000. So this is really just something to be mindful of that, it can easily be overlooked. So when making small purchases within these thresholds without obtaining quotes, you have to keep in mind this cumulative threshold of $50,000. So just by way of example, if you have 10 $5,000 purchases from the same vendor in a given fiscal year, that's okay because that total is within that $50,000 threshold for the year. But if that annual total exceeds $50,000, then you would no longer be in compliance with the Procurement Code. So that's just something to consider. And one relatively simple solution for this is just to get quotes. If you get a minimum of 2 quotes, even if you're within that small purchase threshold, then the purchase would actually fall within the quotes process, not the small purchase. And therefore it's not included in that annual cumulative threshold. So moving on, with quotes, the threshold for that is up to $50,000. Above that requires a standard procurement process or an exception. When using the quote process, you do need to get a minimum of 2 quotes before selecting the vendor and making the purchase. Next is the professional service providers and consultants. The threshold for this is $100,000. With that, there is a requirement for a minimum of 3 quotes or responses. And I put in there quotes and responses because there are a couple ways you can conduct this procurement. If you are looking for a certain, you need a certain type of professional service and of vendors in that industry that can provide those, you can contact these vendors directly and just request quotes from a minimum of 3. Or if you don't know of any vendors or you don't know of at least 3 that you could get quotes from, you can always put out a professional service solicitation and let vendors respond to that, with their quotes. And then you can meet that minimum of 3 quotes that way. So moving on to the small purchase design professional, this is similar to the professional services, $1,000 or $100,000 threshold. Same thing, minimum 3 quotes or responses that need to be evaluated before making an award. And that's based on a best value determination. Then small purchase and construction, there's a $25,000 direct award threshold, or up to $100,000 with a minimum of 2 quotes. And then moving on to the construction with approved vendor list, that's quite a bit higher of a threshold. You can see $2.5 million. And then lastly is the request for proposal. So basically, if any purchase, other than the construction with the approved vendor list is going to be a purchase over $100,000, then you're in the request for proposals territory, and you have to go through that process to conduct that procurement. So purchase splitting. The Procurement Code is it very clearly prohibits splitting purchases. This is contained in section 63G 6A 506. And there it states that it is unlawful for a person knowingly to divide a single procurement into multiple smaller procurements, including by dividing an invoice or purchase order into multiple invoices or purchase orders. If the single procurement would not have qualified as a small purchase, if one or more of the multiple smaller procurements qualify as a small purchase, and the division is done with the intent to avoid having to use a standard procurement process that you would otherwise be required to use for the single procurement, or make one or more of the multiple smaller procurements fall below a small purchase threshold that the single procurement would not have fallen below without the division. So this is something that, it's very serious, and unfortunately people do it, and it gets them into trouble. So you don't want to take any shortcuts or try to divide or split any purchases to try to avoid those different thresholds, or to make one of those items or purchases fall within the small purchase threshold, because not only is splitting purchases illegal, but it could get you fired. And when I say it's illegal, depending on the dollar amount of the purchase, it could actually be a misdemeanor or even a felony. So, the last thing you want to do is end up on the news or in jail for splitting a purchase. So we always just say, just don't do it. Just make sure you're being transparent and you're following the procurement code and conducting the procurements as you're supposed to within those thresholds. And so with that, I'm actually going to turn the time over to Michael now to finish off our presentation.
Thanks, Adam. I hope everybody can hear me okay. So I'm going to be talking about state cooperative contracts. This is actually a good way to avoid a lot of the things that Adam mentioned and ways of getting in trouble. So Utah Code 63G682105 governs cooperative procurements. And public entities, including LEAs, may purchase goods or services from these state cooperative contracts. And we really encourage you to do so, just because these items that are on state contract, the solicitation has already been done by state purchasing. And so there's no additional solicitation needed. And these purchases, since they've been done by state purchasing, have been vetted and are deemed compliant with Procurement Code. So you can find the state cooperative contracts on state purchasing's website. And this is the link right there. And I think Pat will be getting you the slides after we're done, so you can follow that. But once again, I highly encourage you to use state cooperative contracts and go there to make, before you start a procurement, or when you are trying to figure out what you're looking for, just check on state purchasing's website and just do a search, see if they have it there. And once again, like I said, it's a good place to start and avoid all the other trouble. Go to the next slide, Adam. Okay, so talking about trouble, this is ethics, the good, the bad, the ugly. So Utah Code 63G6A Part 24 deals with ethics. It applies to procurement professionals, i.e. staff, but not to superintendent, business administrators, or principals. But we still recommend you follow it, just because who doesn't want to follow the ethical code? So this prohibits accepting gifts, gratuities, kickbacks. It also involves violations that are subject to felony charges, loss of employment penalties. Once again, I would just encourage you to all look at this particular portion of the code and go through it. Administrative Rule R3324 deals with conflicts, and so this is something we actually, when we're running an RFP, we go through with the evaluation committee every time, just because it's easy for these conflicts to arise and you might not even realize it. So with social vendors, we understand that certain people or certain vendors in the community are, they're just prevalent vendors. We run into them all the time. And so, those professional relationships aren't necessarily prohibited. But, we just try and limit those, keeping them professional. And then, just making sure that we're being mindful of how it looks to the general public if we're, overly socializing with certain vendors or not. Obviously, financial conflicts with vendors is a big deal. So once again, I would encourage you to look at the rules just regarding that. But I think it's pretty standard, where if you have a financial investment in any of these vendors, you should probably consider that as a conflict of interest, along with personal relationships with the vendors. And this ethical standard is something that we all try to live by, and I'm going to read it verbatim. So, an employee of a procurement shall uphold and promote the independence, integrity, and impartiality of the procurement process as required in code and rule, and shall avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety. And that last part, the appearance of impropriety is a big thing. Once again, we don't want to be perceived as being unethical. Once again, as Adam mentioned, we're dealing with taxpayer dollars, and so we try and be mindful of that. Go to the next slide, Adam. Here's some resources that are actually really beneficial, I think, for everybody to look at. So starting with USB's Purchasing and Contracts website, I would encourage you all to go there. We have a lot of the forms that Adam mentioned, like the ACOS, sole source, professional services, as well as just some general, finance tips and everything like that. So I'd encourage you to just take a look at our website. State purchasing, that's another good place to go for. They actually have courtesy posting services where if you need help posting a solicitation, they can post a solicitation for you. And they also, once again, they have the state cooperatives, have the services that they've contracted for through their state cooperative purchasing process. And once again, I think they're a really good resource. They since they do so much purchasing throughout the state, I would encourage you to go to them. There's their website, purchasing.utah.gov. There's also some professional organizations for purchasing in our state that are really helpful. So the Utah chapter of NIGP, that's the National Institute of Governmental Purchasing. They're a professional resource that I would say is key to doing anything, because they're a national network too, so they're connected to other states. And I think it's really nice to join, if you're able to join our Utah chapter, because then it helps you network with those other states and kind of see how other states are doing their procurement processes. And then we also have EdPAC, which is the Purchasing Advisory Committee for Education. They offer some training, and they even have some of their own cooperative contracts, which I didn't even realize. I had known about them, but I had not really ever utilized them. But I highly recommend going to that website and just checking out what they have on their cooperative contracts. Go to the next slide. And here's some just professional development opportunities for everyone to get involved in. State Purchasing has their Procurement Education Partnership, or PEP, trainings, and those are held quarterly. And then Utah chapter of NIGP has quarterly meetings as well, and they also have an annual forum. And actually, we have our annual meeting tomorrow for that Utah chapter of NIGP. I know it's kind of short notice, but there is that opportunity. And then EdPAC has their annual buyers conference. I believe that was just held last week, and so that's held every November. So we just missed that one. But once again, it's a good idea to just kind of check out their website and see what they have available. And then our staff meetings are open to everybody. Ours are held on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. State Purchasing is also open to everyone. I'm not sure when theirs are held anymore, but I would recommend, if you have any questions, just popping into one of those staff meetings, and you can let us know if you want to do that. We can get you set up to do that. Next slide. So this is just some general advice to leave you with. Once again, participate in these professional organizations. I think they're really great resources and networking opportunities. Develop a forms of practice. Once again, this is where, like Adam mentioned, we have the ACOS form, we have the professional services forms. Like, you can take a look at that on our website, and and use those forms if you feel like they're useful for you, or develop some of your own that are that are compliant with code. And it also helps just to have some general checklists and standardized practices. I mean, this is true for any process, but I think it's a good reminder to put together some checklists for these processes. Make sure that your internal policies and practices comply with code and rule. Once again, we want to be compliant. Utilize those state contracts, because when those solicitations have been done and they're compliant with code and rule, and you really don't have to worry too much about doing much of a solicitation with that. because it's already done and you can just purchase off them and use all these resources that are available to you. Next slide. So that's it for us. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Adam or myself. We're happy to help you. And once again, thank you for your time, and hope we made up some time. Sorry we were delayed.
No problem. Thank you, Michael and Adam. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to have Tony Onofrietti now, and he's agreed to talk fast so that we can hit our lunchtime of 12:30. So we appreciate you, Tony, and take it away.
Thank you, Sam. Are you able to hear me and see my slides?
Yes, go ahead. We should be good.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Onofrietti. I serve as the Grants Compliance Officer with the Utah State Board of Education, and we're going to talk today on an overview of grants compliance and reimbursement requests. That I'll move forward as an overview of the presentation. Want to remind everyone that both pass-through entities, the USBE as a recipient of federal funds, and that in turn provides those funds to other organizations, and subrecipients are required to ensure that all awards are managed in compliance with all applicable federal law and state statutes and the specific terms and conditions of the award. There's a lot of layers of compliance, as you know. In my 20 years of doing compliance in the state of Utah, I'm very proud to say that Utah has a very strong culture of compliance. Most of the times that there's issues that arise that can usually be tied to either a training issue or a lack of oversight. We really have a strong culture of compliance, and we're really grateful for that and our working relationship, our partnership with LEAs. We want to try to continue and build upon our partnership so that we can maintain a strong culture of compliance. So this graph just kind of shows the different levels of regulation, federal law, state statutes, USBE, administrative rules, and the award terms and conditions. The point I'd like to make here is to effectively interpret and apply these regulations, the order of precedence starts with the terms and conditions of the award letter. So we're kind of working from the bottom up of this triangle. This level of regulation may be applied to determine pertinent rules. And generally, the more conservative or restrictive rule of all of the levels will apply. But it's very important that we start with the letter of award, the terms and condition of the specific award, as each grant, each award is unique. What we're showing here on this slide are some examples of important federal laws that are related to public education. These are the big ones. Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Higher Education Act, McKinsey-Vento, IDEA, No Child Left Behind, Every Student Succeeds Act. I put this here for your reference. A lot of these laws can also be found and through the Department of Education's website, and link I've provided there for you. When we talk about federal law, we talk about uniform guidance, and that refers to Title II of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200. uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements. You also hear us referring to EDGAR, which is the Education Department General Administration administrative regulations, which include parts 75, 76, and 81, as well as the Federal Register. So incorporated in that pyramid, the reverse triangle that I showed you earlier, when we're talking about federal law, federal oversight, these are the sources that we tend to refer to most often. Delving a little bit into the Code of Federal Regulations, ecfr.gov is a great reference. It's a place where you can find the most current citations for the Code of Federal Regulations related to Part 2, Title 2, grants and agreements, as well as some of the other titles that may be pertinent, Title 34, public education. Delving into Title 2, grants and agreements, you'll see there under Part 200, that's where the citations for the uniform guidance are housed. So you can quickly research these on your own if you ever need to look something up, or please reach out to me, reach out to my office. That's the service and the resource that the Grants Compliance Officer provides to all of the USBE and its LEAs and subrecipients. Federal Register, you heard that mentioned earlier today during the training. The Federal Register basically centralizes and standardizes the public release of information about federal government affairs. And the reason that I bring this up is it's very useful to read the preamble of the entries in the Federal Register, for example, for the changes that were made with the uniform guidance, because in that short one-page preamble, it'll talk about reasons for the updates and the regulatory action of the agencies, basically the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the update. It'll provide the summary, the background and the objectives of the rulemaking, and any additional references and notices that may be required by law. So the Federal Register, it's a very long document. It's very dense document. It certainly provides good information, but I find it useful to look at the preamble and just read that one-page document, because it really provides you really good basic information. This is the page off of the last update that was made to the uniform guidance, the new regulations. I've highlighted some sections that basically talk about when the effective dates of the uniform guidance, that the changes went into effect, what the intent of the effort was, some of the background to why they made the changes, the motivation for striving to implement revisions to strengthen government-wide its approach to performance and risk management, as well as referencing relevant parts that were affected by the updates. Thinking back to the inverted triangle again, under federal law, we have state statutes. Utah Code is outlined very nicely on their website, and I have that highlighted there for you. We deal a lot with Title 53E, 53F, and 53G in the public education system. You also hear today reference to Title 63J, which has a lot of the regulations and laws pertaining to budgeting. USBE administrative rules can be easily found on the Utah Board of Education website. R277-113 speaks a lot to the LEA fiscal and auditing policies, as well as 277-115, which is the LEA supervision and monitoring requirements. All of the administrative rules for USBE can be easily found on our website. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I can help you navigate through this pretty quickly. Also on our website, on our financial operations page, we have a program menu where there's some very good information for you, particularly discussion about the indirect costs, the different how indirect costs are put together, the methodology, the different cost types, the different cost rate schedules for the given fiscal year. I want to mention the Office of Management and Budget Compliance Supplements that are available. These are address most major federal grants in dealing with audits under Uniform Grant Guidance. If you need to research an individual grant program or determining audit objectives and procedures for different grant compliance, the compliance are very useful, and they're updated each year. The most current one is the July 2021, which came out earlier this year. I also gave you a snapshot of the compliance addendum supplement that was released in December of 2020, anticipating that there could potentially be another addendum released this December, which would then be part of the Appendix 11 compliance supplement for 2021. All of our compliance management and all of our grants management in general, as you know, is done in our Utah grants system. It houses a lot of the documents of the grants, a lot of your compliance responsibilities, and our responsibilities as the SCA. Everything is managed within Utah grants. And I can't emphasize enough how much we enjoy a very strong culture of compliance here in Utah, and that is directly a result of the LEAs and the public charter schools, our subrecipients who want to be in compliance, who do a great job in communicating with us and following the regulations and really making sure that we're doing the right thing with for the right reasons with our grant and award funding. So in Utah grants, the letter of award for each grant is included. It basically outlines the budget periods, the performance periods, any pertinent regulations or attachments, but as I referenced earlier, the specific terms and conditions of the grant agreement. So your first resource should be that letter of award to reference those regulations and attachments and any specific terms and conditions that must be followed with that particular award. Also in Utah grants, you're probably familiar with the assurances that are required to be monitored and maintained each year. Generally in May, June, each LEA and public charter school will have to go in and verify assurance with different uniform guidance and state statute administrative board rules that are pertinent to the grants. And these are, again, required by both the SCA and the LEA to make sure that we are spending public monies, federal fund monies appropriately. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each one of these individually. You should be familiar with them as you sign off on these each year. But I want to make reference to the citations in the upper right-hand side of the of each assurance. That's where you can look that up. You can see what it is that we're basing our assurance on. And again, if you have any question with that, please contact my office. I'm happy to go through that with you. But we do have assurances for financial management that the LEAs are going to certify for internal controls and record retention requirements, access to records that may be needed for monitoring or for audit, Cost sharing, matching, maintenance of effort requirements, period of performance, procurement, as you just heard the procurement presentation. Again, these aren't all of the assurances, but I wanted to highlight the ones that are in the financial management section. Payments, remedies for non-compliance. And again, you can see that we're very specific with the citations that we're basing these assurances on. Mandatory disclosures, conflicts of interest, equipment, suspension, or debarment. Again, your letter of award and your assurances are two key compliance components that are housed within Utah grants and are ready available for your access and, of course, your verification of the assurances each year. Audit requirements, subrecipient and subcontractor determinations as well. So, in the interest of time, know your compliance requirements. Every grant and contract is unique. It has its own specific terms and conditions. Again, my office is here to help you with that. Be sure that you know funding sources and applicable guidance, the budget and performance periods as we spoke about, that the dollars are being used for the scope of the project, work to be performed, what's allowable and unallowable costs, direct and indirect costs, what are your requirements for records and reporting, any contract amounts and specifications. Know who your key contacts for assistance are at the USBE. Be in good communication with your program managers. And again, my office is there as a resource. Just some key points in identifying risks to avoid common audit issues. Missing or incomplete supporting documentation for expenditures is generally a big one. Required procurement procedures not being followed is a common audit issue. Lack of segregation of duties, making sure that there's good separation of responsibilities. Any lack of proper approvals of expenses and required reports. These are key areas because they lead to risks, misuse of grant funds, failing to achieve the grant objectives, violations of terms and conditions or statutes, laws, misrepresentation of reported results, the reputational damage from grant noncompliance. Again, I can't speak enough as to how we have such a good reputation in Utah for being a culture of compliance, and we don't want to jeopardize that reputational damage either with the federal awarding agencies or here within the state at our level or at the LEA level. It could result in the loss of future funding. Fortunately, we don't go down that road very often at all. Maintain strong internal controls. Again, segregate duties, know the approval and the authorization process, who's signing off on expenditures, reports, procurements, manage and monitor those compliance requirements. Again, be in contact with my office, with your program managers, with your fiscal monitors, verify your performance targets, enforce appropriate access restrictions, whether that be physical files or electronic data. Document your grant timeliness, your milestones, and again, accuracy of reconciliations of expenditures and related revenues, budget adjustments, and financial reports. We see a lot of internal control deficiencies, typically in the area of oversight and authorization. Again, that segregation that we were talking about. Purchasing or cost coding, improper cost coding, disbursements, a lack of ownership or knowledge of the internal control requirements. My office does do trainings on request by either on site or virtually, where we can go over different compliance requirements or assist you in strengthening internal control processes, or again, my office is available to chat and discuss different pathways for strengthening internal control requirements. So I tried to put together a screenshot that kind of captured the monitoring life cycle that we have at the SEA level for LEAs, and putting in the uniform guidance references at each of the phase as we go through the grant life cycle. So hopefully that's useful to you to kind of see the flow and where those regulations come from. I know I'm giving you a lot of information in a very short period of time. I'd like to kind of get us on track here with time. So I'm trying to keep this high level. Please reach out to my office if you have any specific questions. Lastly, just want to talk a little bit about best practices for reimbursement requests. The USBE will be putting out a formal policy and procedure on its website for reimbursement requirements across the board. But here are some best practices and some very routine and basic approaches to making sure that your reimbursements get approved and the dollars distributed quickly. So again, the USBE is responsible for ensuring that compliance with these regulations as we govern programs that we administer to LEAs. But it is a teamwork, working back and forth. We value our partnership with the LEAs because again, we build and maintain that strong culture of compliance. So we want to meet these oversight requirements by approving allowable costs and activities, and we want that without overly burdening LEAs with unnecessary administrative work. We want you to do what you do best, which is take care of our students, but we need to make sure that we are compliant with relevant regulations. So communicate often with program and fiscal specialists frequently, especially prior to putting in a reimbursement request submission. And again, my office is there to provide assistance. Again, we be a partner in compliance, but detailed documentation that supports each reimbursement request is required for both the USBE as we get audited and for the LEAs as you are subject to audit and monitoring as well. So some points, key best practices. Again, expenditures need to be necessary, allowable, allocable, and reasonable. There needs to be supporting documentation for reimbursement requests that provide enough information to evaluate factors of necessary, allowable, allocable, and reasonable, and that shows proof of payment, that the LEA incurred the cost prior to requesting reimbursement. A detailed general ledger is a good tool for providing that documentation. Journal entries alone are generally not accepted. You heard from earlier presentations this morning the purpose of the detailed general ledger and not just simply journal entries for documenting reimbursement requests. We like to see these submitted at least quarterly, but monthly reimbursement requests are preferred. Period 13 reimbursement requests should be due by August 15th for the prior fiscal year. like allows enough time for it to be processed and for funds to be distributed. Grant closings and supporting documentation are generally due no later than 45 days after the period of availability concludes. Again, that allows us enough time to report and be compliant with our responsibilities, as well as giving ample time for the LEAs to provide that documentation. Reimbursement request requirements that are deemed high risk by program or financial risk assessments may differ from these requirements. They may require more documentation. So again, it's a good rule of thumb, just be in good communication with your program managers, with your fiscal specialists before and as you're submitting these reimbursement requests, and therefore we can kind of put up the stop sign before the accident, if you will. Make sure that we have the proper documentation so that we can get the reimbursement out and the funds distributed quickly. This just goes on to say a little bit more about if we need more information, additional information to further clarify. An example was used earlier this morning, a specific description of items that are procured, as opposed to just saying a certain amount was purchased at a particular place. Receipts may be provided. Time and effort documentation for individuals being paid for services in line items specific to project funding and allowances should be included with the first reimbursement request of a program. And if it's being requested at one time, should be included for the entire program. Again, these are best practices. Programs involving matching funds must include the name of the partner entity and the amount of matching funds provided by the partner entity. Finally, program financial records should be maintained in accordance with the record retention schedules and regulations. Again, that was delineated again in the assurances each year, and those citations are provided. And recognize that the use of federal and state funds are always highly scrutinized. We're dealing with public dollars, dealing with your money and our money, both as professionals and as individual taxpayers. We want to make sure that financial records and performance reports are in alignment with the terms and conditions of the awarding agency. And just wanted to mention a caveat. There are specific requirements that apply with the new ESSER and COVID-related funds, which may parallel this or have their own specific reimbursement request rules. So I provided you in the handout some resources, again, just for a quick review. The Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, you can very quickly reference the citations that are pertinent to the different components or the different topics that we've addressed here with compliance. Utah Code.
Tony, if you can hear me, we had a
USBE administrative rules. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention. I know that's a lot of information in a very short period of time. Again, the slides will be provided to you. There's a lot of hyperlinks in there so you can get additional information. If you have any questions, please reach out to me directly. I'm more than happy to help, to provide training as necessary or one-on-one discussion, whatever we can do to be of service to you. I very much appreciate, as a grants compliance officer, that partnership and that strong culture of compliance that we have nurtured and cultivated here in the state of Utah, and that is directly attributable to you. The LEAs and the public charters are and spending their grant awards appropriately. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll turn the time back over to Sam.
Thank you, Tony. Can you hear me, Tony?
I can.
Okay, could you quickly respond? We had a question on if the Part 200 compliance supplements to on Section 2 of the CFR are additive, or does the July 2021 version supersede the December version?
The July one is currently the most applicable. If an addendum is made, they usually come out at the end of the year in December, and they are in parallel with the one that was put out in July. So the short answer to your question is July 2020 is is the most current document.
Okay,
Did you hear me, Sam?
yes, thank you. Thank you, Tony. Thank you all. We will see you at 1:30 and have a good lunch. Send any questions you have over the chat.
Hello, can everyone hear me? I don't know. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brett from School Finance, and I'm the School Finance Specialist Manager. I just wanted to go over a few things real quick before we get started. I wanted to show my appreciation and thank everybody, all the LEAs for their submissions on October 1. We actually had 95% of the LEAs submit on time. So that's a huge success. There's been about 10% that have had to resubmit from October 1, but I believe that 95% is a huge success for us. And I really appreciate all the time and effort that you guys do and spend. I know it's a lot of work for several of you to put these reports together, to put together the AFR and APR and get it submitted to us on time. So I just want to take that time to appreciate, to show my appreciation for everybody. Now I'll turn the time over to Dallin, and he'll be talking about indirect costs.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dallin Pinier. I am a school finance specialist. I'm on Brett's team. I'm also the charter authorizer liaison. So if any of you guys ever have questions about charter authorizing or compliance, that is something that I can help with, so you're welcome to reach out to me. Today, my presentation is on indirect costs. It's a very high-level indirect cost review. I don't plan on getting down into the weeds. So first off, we've made a few updates to, or probably an important update to the indirect cost tool. So if you have done indirect costs in the past, you had to enter in all the information manually before by each contract, their name, fund code, function code, all of that you had to enter in manually. The update that was made allows you to carry forward the information that you had from last year and only enter in the amounts, because typically it's the amounts that are changing and not necessarily all of the other information along with it. So as it carries forward, the amount values will be zeroed out and everything else will be carried out. So you want to be sure and be careful that what has carried forward is still correct. If you need to add anything, you can still add any new pieces of information, or if something is no longer relevant, you can still delete that. But this should save you guys a lot of time in entering that information into the indirect cost tool. So the tabs on the indirect cost tool, and you'll see I have some screenshots for later that I'll show you. It'll make more sense, but the tabs that this carry forward works on are the unallowable cost tab, the square footage by building, and the contracts and subawards. So this is a screenshot of the indirect cost tool, and just as a reminder, you'll log on to your UPEF's account, you'll click on Tools, and then it's in the drop-down menu for Tools, it's Indirect Cost Tool. And so this is what you'll see when it'll pull up. And then when you go to click on a tab, and in this example, the unallowable cost tab, the next thing that you will see is a pop-up that says Data Pull Confirmation. And on that pop-up, it says, we have detected this. This is your first time working on this schedule for this for the selected year. Would you like to pull enter data minus amounts from last year into this year? And so this is really important because this is it's a one-time thing. So if you select yes, then it'll pull the data forward for you. If you select no, then it'll be blank like it has been in years past. And unfortunately at this point, there's no way, if you accidentally select no, there's not a way to revert that and have it pull forward. So you want to be sure that you make the right selection. And as I was saying before, the unallowable cost tab, the square footage by building, and the contracts and subawards are the tabs that you'll see this pop-up occur. So once you select yes, assuming that is something that you want to do, then it'll pull up the indirect cost tool for that specific tab. And in this case, it's the unallowable cost tab. And as you look at this screenshot, you'll see exactly what I was saying, that the only thing that is different from the last year's entry are the amounts, and they're just zeroed out. One thing I do want to bring up is in the indirect cost tool, you will want to make sure and review each tab as well. And this is what I was saying earlier, to where if you make the wrong selection, if you select no, it will not carry the data forward, and then you can't go back. But if you select yes, then it will carry what data you had last year forward. And as a reminder to you guys, the deadline to enter in that information to get indirect costs, or an indirect cost rate, should I say, is December 15th. That's when we need all of that information to be certified by. We also will need an organizational chart. That is something that is required by the federal government in order for us to give out indirect cost rates. This can be submitted to us, to schoolfinance at schools.utah.gov. In my slide presentation that was sent out, I had a typo, just so you're aware. At the end of the email address, it's schools.utah.gov. I failed to put an S in there, so just so you're all aware. And then if your LEA does not want an indirect cost rate, we will need to be notified as well. You can notify us through that same email address. Okay, so there's a question. It says, if you select yes, you can edit the amounts and function, right? So if you select yes, everything is still editable. So if you need to change multiple things on a contract or a line item, you can still change all of that. It is the amounts that just show up as zero, so. All right, and so in the indirect cost tool, you'll need to make sure, and I think I said this before, but make sure you view every tab, certify the tabs that need to be certified. You'll definitely want to review the excluded cost tab. It's not required that you do so, but it just allows you to verify the exclusions in that list match what you guys have reported, your LEAs reported. On the unallowable cost tab, typically you'll see bad debt, and there are examples afterwards. So you'll see bad debt, contingencies, entertainment, fines and penalties, and then general governance. Those are typically expenses on the unallowable cost tab. The square footage by building tab, in my experience, it's typically left blank by the LEAs, but even if you are not using that for your indirect cost calculation, you will still need, even if it's blank, you'll still need to go in and certify that. So as I mentioned before, the unused leave paid at termination is the only tab where the data pull forward does not occur. And that's just because that information is typically, it's a one-time thing. So you won't be paying out multiple years someone, their vacation benefits that they didn't use. Usually that happens in one fiscal year. And then the contracts and subawards, typically they're $25,000 or over. Things that are not included are contracts that are less than $25,000 typically. And then the very last part is the submit and certify tab. You'll go through all that information one more time and then make sure that it's all certified. And like I said, it was a very high level overview of indirect costs. So do you guys have any questions besides what was already asked?
So in the past, the last few years, we've sent like a support schedule, and then we've just put in a field that says like see support schedule. And we've emailed that to you guys. Are we doing away with that at this point, or is that still okay?
That is still okay. What this allows you to do for some of those LEAs that have entered in that detail, they can go in and just, it'll actually just copy and paste that detail over to the current year, and they just need to adjust the amounts. If you're doing something like the supporting document, you're summarizing it in UPEFs, and then you're providing that supporting document to us. Please still continue to do that.
Any other questions?
Great, thanks, Dallin. Next up is Laura Wilson with GASB updates, or sorry, Brett. Just 1 second as we present her slides here.
I do have to apologize. I do have to take off, so I'll have to leave. But thank you. I wanted to thank my team for all their help.
Sorry, I'm getting there as fast as I can. Wow. What? Yeah, I don't even know how I did that. That's it. Okay. There's almost. Okay, thanks for your patience. Thanks those of you that came back from lunch. We hope that we're gonna present something that's helpful to you guys today. So I'm Laura Wilson. I'm on Brett Baltazar's school finance team, and I've been asked to talk just a little bit about some GASB updates. So we're just gonna hit on 3 of them, GASB 98, 87, and 96. So GASB 98 is just a name change. We're all used to seeing CAFR. It came to the attention of GASB that that is a racial slur in several different areas of the world. So they've changed that to the ACFR, around the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. So that's what we're going to use going forward. So as we talk about 87 and 96, I'm discussing them together because they have such strong similarities. I know 87's been talked about quite a bit already. They actually bumped the implementation date forward for this. They had initially said that we would start last year, and then they discovered there were some government entities that was a problem for, so they pushed it a year forward. So actually, as of this year, 2021, we are implementing GASB 87, which of course is leases. Basically, this just means that now we treat leases as a financing. So we will always record two parts, an interest expense and an amortization expense. The lessees will recognize the right to use asset and the lease liability in the beginning, and the lessors will recognize the lease receivable and a deferred flow. So when you compare this to GASB 96, GASB 96 is about SBITAs. So this is a subscription-based information technology arrangement. So basically it's cloud, which we're all doing more and more of. So it's effective next year, but I'm talking about it now because it's so similar to 87, it might be helpful to implement it early as you're looking at your contracts to see if they fall under 87. So the basic principles are very similar. There are two parts, interest expense and amortization expense. It does define what an SBITA is, establishes that it does result in a right to use asset and a corresponding liability. And then it provides capitalization criteria for any other outlays outside of the subscription expense. So when we look at Statement 87, to decide if we have a lease, there are some components we check. The contract, of course, has to be for a non-financial asset. It is legally enforceable, whether it's written or verbal, and it has to be an exchange or exchange-like transaction. So there's no $1 token payment that will work and count as a lease. So the control of use, but not the asset itself, is transferred, so the benefits and the burdens of ownership are not transferred. The term of a lease is a non-cancelable period. There are options to extend and terminate. Also, there will be periods subject to fiscal funding. In order for the term to change, the options have to be exercised. However, if you're dealing with fiscal funding, if it's reasonably certain that that funding is going to change, then the lease will change. I've put in an example of lease accounting. I think probably most people started doing this last year, but I don't know. Sometimes it's helpful for me to see nuts and bolts. So I put it out there just to see the difference between the entries for both the lessee and the lessor. Just a reference point, check the slide. So Statement 96, when we're deciding if we have an SBITA, similar considerations. The contract also conveys control of the right to use, but not of the asset itself. Also has to be exchange or exchange-like. The term is a little bit different. It's any period in which the government has a non-cancelable right to use the IT asset. Also, there are options. So I just thought I would run through, because this one's kind of new. This is an LEA that has a subscription for cloud software. It's a 3-year subscription with payments $5,000 annually paid in advance. So the first thing we do is we recognize the value of the liability, which is just the present value of the subscription payment. The value of the asset is the liability plus any implementation costs. So you can see in the entry, the asset and the liability, you do have cash implementation costs for data migration, and there is a one-time expense. Then you would also record the amortization expense, amortize the asset, and the reduction of the subscription liability. Hopefully that's helpful. So is it possible, as you evaluate your contracts, that you could have a contract that is both an SBITA and a lease? And the answer is yes. There could be an equipment portion that falls under lease provisions as well as an IT component. And I think that's why it might just make sense, we're already in there, evaluate contracts to decide 6. Just kind of on the horizon, as I was looking forward, we are expecting a statement in April of 2023. GASB is re-examining governmental fund measurement focus and basis of accounting and financial statement presentation, which those are 3 really big areas. I did look at the discussion that's already out there, and it looks like the financial statement presentation is going to be giving a really strong framework to the management discussion analysis. And then I think what they're going to see is just regulation that will help everyone be consistent as far as measurement focus. So that's out there, it's coming. If you want to read more about these fascinating subjects, you can go to GASB 87 or GASB 96. We also have some great previous training data at this link on our website. And then GASB Toolbox also has, for me, I like to reference, it's kind of like a frequently asked questions quick reference that you can go to, and then my information here is. And we are happy to help out in any way that we can. So let us know. Thanks.
Next, well, is there any questions? Is there any questions that people have here or virtually? If none, we'll go on to John, and he'll be presenting some items in relation to fund balances and things like that. Give him a minute to set up. Give him a minute to set up.
Okay, you hear me? Okay. Hello, everyone. My name's John Palmer. Finance specialist. I'm on Brett's team here. I've been asked to present on fund balances and function codes. Hello, everyone. My name's John Palmer. This has to do with the financial reporting requirements to the UPEF system. One of the reasons we're training on this year specifically, this year is the first year that we're getting GASB financial reporting statements from charter schools. As those are coming in, we're taking a look and comparing to the UPEF's file, and unfortunately, one of the areas that we see for improvement is in fund balances here. So I'm just going to quickly go through those. This slide here, this is a screenshot of our chart of accounts, our balance sheet codes. Focus of this training is mostly down here in this bottom box for government fund type codes here. Specifically, if you see like the non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned, I'm just going to walk through those and maybe try to explain what those mean. This getting an echo. All right. I need to be in. Okay, I just closed my Zoom meeting. I heard there's a little echo, so let me know if that fixes it. What we're looking at here, this is a fund financial statement, governmental funds, and if you see here, so I cut out the assets and liabilities and everything up above, but down here at the bottom, you'll see non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. And at the end of the day, the goal of financial reporting to UPEFs is to get UPEFs to match this statement. This statement is for major funds, but for the non-major funds, it'll also match. So that's later on in your financial statements. When you hear fund balance, so right away you think of governmental funds. And basically what it is, it's assets plus deferred outflows of resources minus liabilities and deferred inflows. Yeah, again, when you hear fund balance, this is what we're talking about here. If you hear net position, that's probably a non-governmental fund. Not really covering that, but we may see that as well. Okay, I'm gonna scoot closer to the mic. Okay, hopefully that's better. So the first code here, this is a non-spendable fund balance, and basically this includes amounts that cannot be spent because they're either not in spendable form or legally required to be maintained intact. So some examples of this would be inventory or a prepaid asset, property acquired for resale, or the principal of a permanent fund or revolving loan fund. So anything here that's a non-spendable fund balance, you would want to use one of these two codes in UPEF, so 9860 or 9869. The next one down is a restricted fund balance. When you hear restricted, you think it's a restriction on your fund balance that's externally placed. So for example, by creditors, debt covenants, grantors, contributors, or laws and regulation. So some examples of a restricted fund balance. We have unspent tax revenues levied for a specific purpose, such as capital projects or debt service. We also have unspent program-specific revenue received from the state with purpose restrictions. That could be a restricted fund balance. We have, let's see, 7 codes here for restricted fund balance. So we have debt service, capital outlay, food service, student activities, non-K-12, reading levy, and then a kind of a catch-all for other. So that'll be a big one there. So the next one down is a committed fund balance called committed. These are amounts that can only be used for specific purposes pursuant to constraints imposed by formal action of the government's highest level of decision-making authority. So typically that's your board. A committed fund balance reflects a self-imposed limitation on the use of otherwise available expendable financial resources. So again, the difference between restricted and committed is restricted is the externally enforced restrictions, and committed is internally. Some examples: contractual obligations, economic stabilization, aka rainy day funds, employee benefit obligations for unpaid compensated absences and early retirement incentives. Here for committed fund balance, we have 4 codes in our chart of accounts. So we'd want to see those coded to 9880 through 9889. The next one is assigned fund balance. So these are all kind of similar sounding: restricted, assigned, committed. But an assigned fund balance, so this just one step further down. We have an amount that is constrained by the government's intent, and that's the key word that I found there, to be used for specific purposes, but are neither restricted nor committed. So it's similar to committed, but not, doesn't have as much weight. So with a committed fund balance, usually it's a formal action to get rid of that. Signed, yeah, that might not necessarily be the case. For assigned fund balance, we have the code 9890. So just one of those to pick from. And then the last one is the unassigned fund balance, which is just the residual. So it's basically anything that's not non-spendable, restricted, committed, or assigned. Here we have the residual fund balance that is not, kind of just said that. Our chart of account codes for this, 9899. And that's it. Again, this is that same screenshot before, but you see on the left, hopefully it's starting to make more sense. On the right, you have your funds, kind of if you're looking at columns, for example, and then on the left, you have those separated fund balances there. So especially for charters in the past, what the financial statements used to say is just, it would say net assets with donor restrictions or net assets without donor restrictions. So here under GASB, it's just a little more detailed. And this is what we hope to see in UPEFs here. For more information on these, the best place to go is to the source, which is GASB statement number 54, fund balance reporting and governmental fund type definitions. You know, whether you're a preparer or a reader of financial statements, another good place to look is your LEA's financial statements themselves. So you'll be able to see part of that. The reason I put this in there is because GASB 54 requires disclosures for fund balance. So there's actually in the notes section down at the bottom, they'll provide additional context for those.
We had a couple of questions from the chat, John.
Okay.
So it says we have 5 to 6 different restricted debt service. Do we lump them all together?
Yeah, so when you report to us in UPEFs, the code you'll want to use is 9870, so restricted fund balance for debt service. So that would be, we can get to additional detail from your financial statements, but that should be good for the UPEFs reporting requirement.
Okay, and then the other question is committed code 9889 is listed for both employee obligations and other. Is that right?
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. Brett is showing me that this is a typo. So I will fix that before we post to our websites, but our committed codes are 9880. Okay. Yeah, the one for employee obligations should say 9882. Yeah, sorry about that. So it should be 9880, 81, 82, and then 89 for other.
Follow up to the restricted debt service question. Only done at the end of the fiscal year, correct? It's for the UPEF's upload.
Yeah, so we'll only need this for, I think this question is, do I need to submit this for budget perhaps? But we would only need this for the October 1 actual submission. I hope that answers that. If not, let me know. Okay. I got one more. So last thing I just wanted to mention really quickly is function code. So we're starting to get notified from some outside people looking into function codes, and they're seeing some discrepancies between LEAs. Some of the questions we get are, you know, they're similar size, similar location, but they're just wildly different in regards to function codes. So it's something we need to look into a little bit. But just wanted to go over these. So a function is basically, it's simple, just classification of an expenditure. Our official NCES definition. So a function describes the activity, which is the important part, is the activity for which a service or object is acquired. So this is opposed to the actual service or object, which is the object code. Online on this link here at the bottom is our function codes, and we have some descriptions up there. We may be looking at adding some more context, maybe make those a little more clear. But if you ever have questions on which function code we should be using, or you want us to take a look, let us know. We're happy to look into it, and it helps us see like where the confusion is, and maybe we'll look into making that improvement because people are looking at it. So, and that's all I have. Was there any more questions? Okay. If you have questions, let us know. School finance at schools.utah.gov is our main kind of shared inbox. I also have the link here with phone numbers and email addresses. So, thank you.
Anything else from you, Brett?
No, just to let you guys know that if you have questions in relation to UPES, the chart of accounts, GASB updates, anything indirect costs, anything related to that, let us know. We can help you answer those questions. Or if there's anything else that you want to let us know, you can, and we'll get you in contact with the right person. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Ron Litchfield is getting set up here, our school transportation specialist. And feel free to send any questions you have for him in the chat.
All right. My name is Ron Litchfield. I'm the Pupil Transportation Specialist at the State Board of Education. And what I thought I'd do today is just really talk about the impacts of things that may impact your budget in pupil transportation, some of the regulations, and just some of the concerns I have collected from many of our transportation directors. I'd like to first start off just by, this slide, just kind of identifying why we transport kids in school buses. And, with this slide, they're just the most safe vehicle on the road. And we're even seeing new technologies being put on our buses. We have danger zone monitoring, automatic emergency brakings, lane departure, stability control, backup cameras, and camera systems. We have the ability to look in a rearview mirror and see bird's eye view of the school bus and all the students that are around the school bus. And so some of these new technologies are really exciting and help improve the safety as we transport students. Next, I just want to show this chart. First of all, students are 70 times more likely to attend school when they're driven to school in a school bus, and I think that's really important. The second part is this image shows that school bus fatalities is less than 1% when we compare, the other options of how students get to school. Nationally, for every 32,000 students that are transported, it saves one life. And so in Utah, we save 6 lives per year by transporting our kids in school buses. Next, just a little bit about our Utah transportation statistics. We have about 3,200 school buses in the state, and we transport a little over 200,000 students each day to and from school. And so, this is huge. It helps reduce congestion, traffic around the schools, and pollution, and is a great benefit to our parents and students that get to ride the school bus. This next piece, I just wanted to share part of my presentation that I shared with our transportation directors. I did a example. This is a screenshot of the pupil transportation SharePoint. This SharePoint I've put together now has over 600 documents and links, and I recorded presentations. I've got them categorized into different areas, and so I've got a section just for the director and supervisors that they can look and see past presentations, learn about how transportation funding works in different sections. I also have other sections, the instructor resources, where I've hosted all the PowerPoints and presentations that have been given by the state over the past 5 years. And so this has become pretty extensive. I also have a link in here to show where regional and national trainings are, because one of the transitions that we've done is we've transitioned our drivers to continuing education. We wanted our instructors to be able to use resources on the site, but we also have instructed our instructors and supervisors to get 10 hours of credits of continuing education every year in areas that will make them better instructors and better supervisors. And so we're really excited to see our instructors and supervisors get trained to help improve their abilities as instructors and supervisors. The next thing I want to talk about is some of our pupil transportation restrictions that may cause an increase in transportation costs. And I did send out a memo just last month on the 11 passenger or more vehicles. And I wanted to expand just a little bit further on that because some of the questions I've been getting have been more related to, what's required when I enter this category of vehicle. And so, first of all, it's against the law for an LEA to use a vehicle with seating capacity of 11 or more, including the driver for transportation of students, unless the vehicle meets the federal school bus safety standard. And you can still use 11 passenger vehicle for your maintenance programs, for maybe delivering instruments, for a competition, but you can't transport students in those vehicles. And so as far as the requirements for a 10 passenger or less vehicle, you just need to verify that the driver who's going to be using that vehicle has a clean driving record. And if you're insured with risk management, you would also have to have that driver complete the defensive driver program. And that's a program that needs to be updated every 2 years. The next level, I guess, of our vehicles would be the multifunction activity bus. And with this is a bus that's primarily used for activities and field trips. It's not allowed to take or pick students up from home and school or school bus stops. When these vehicles are designed for 15 students or less, that really reduces the requirements. So you don't need a CDL with this type of vehicle if it holds 15 or less. You would still need to verify clean driving record. You would still, if you're insured with risk management, have to do their defensive driving program. And the other one is our Utah Highway Patrol would inspect and verify vehicle maintenance program for your LEA. This next step would be our school bus, where we would be picking up students to and from school from their home or bus stop. This opens the door for a lot of regulations. And so as you see, we have, of course, we have all the regulations we had in the previous slides, but we're now required to follow the DOT regulations, the federal drug and alcohol, which would include random testing for our CDL drivers. We're also following our Utah Highway Patrol regulations. We get into the hours of service in addition to the service and inspection program. And then we also follow all the national state school bus requirements and our USBE requirements. So if you have questions on these specific areas, I've done other presentations on this. I've got information on my SharePoint. At the end, I'll share my contact information and you can get with me and I can individually help you guys identify what is needed for this category of school bus. The next thing I want to share is the drug and alcohol clearinghouse. And this clearinghouse shouldn't be new to you guys. I did a presentation last year, but it's new enough that I wanted to remind everyone that there is a requirement for our CDL employers, or commercial driver licensed drivers, to run a full query on new drivers and a limited query on all your current drivers every year. And this is just like a drug and alcohol background check. And so, we're concerned maybe some of our drivers have other jobs, and if they received a positive test at another job and we're also a school bus driver, we would want to be able to check to verify that they have a clean driving record. When this program came out, there were some statistics last December that identified that we had just over 60,000 positive tests reported to this clearinghouse. And so you can see how important this is by taking these CDL drivers who are using drugs or alcohol and getting tickets while they're driving, or having random tests and being removed from that privilege of driving a commercial vehicle. The next thing I want to talk about is we have a new regulation coming for entry-level driver training. And this I've been talking about for at least the past 3 years, trying to get us prepared for a February 2020 deadline. A lot of our LEAs have already transitioned into this program of the entry-level driver training. We had a committee put together that kind of reviewed our current bus driver training program to what was going to be required in February 2022. And we found that our current classroom manual was outdated, that there were several sections that didn't meet this new minimum requirement. And so our committee went and actually determined to do a contract with the school bus safety company. And so I do have a link for the contract. And I know many of our LEAs have already transitioned. One of the nice features of this program is the flexible training options. And so there's options for online, there's options for in-classroom, and there's also options for an instructor teaching it, and which was really flexible. We also noted that with these flexible options, we were able to get and train our drivers much quicker than our current, than the state's program that we had been using. And so as this new requirement comes into effect in 2022, you know, there may be some added costs in a membership to get access to this training program. The other option is we've had a couple LEAs that have been working on updating their own program to meet this new federal minimum standard. And the next thing I want to talk about is kind of the technology that can impact our budgets. And so, you know, as I mentioned on our first slide, we're getting new technology, and it seems like everything these days connects to a computer for diagnosing. I've been a mechanic for over 20 years, and so that's some of the things that I've seen changed over the years to now. Now we have the ability to connect our computer to the school bus and monitor thousands of inputs and outputs, temperature, pressure, sensor positions, motor positions, simultaneously. And one of the nice things about that is you can actually go on a test drive while you're recording all those settings and wait for the check engine light to come on, and you can flag that event, or have it flagged automatically when the check engine light comes on, and you can get back to the shop and you can pull up in your computer and you can actually run through that raw data and look for things that are out of place when that event was flagged. And so there's a lot more capabilities than there was in the past, but with this new technology also, we're finding that a lot of our bus shop computers aren't compatible with this you know, the speed or program requirements that are required. So that might be something to think about as upcoming costs. Again, we have cameras, stop arm cameras, there are coolant heaters, child check alarms, or fire suppression and stability systems that you know, may require additional employee time, you know, to make sure that everything is working properly. As we add new devices, there is always some sort of maintenance schedule for these new devices, whether it's cleaning electronic fan filters or just verifying that the equipment is working properly. Last, you know, with technology, it seems like everything is going up in cost, and that should be no surprise that school buses have increasingly gone up in price over the years. I'm not expecting a big increase. I don't know. I can't tell you what school buses are going to cost in the future, but that's always something to be aware of as we look at our budgets and plan for, you know, our bus replacement schedule and how much money we need to get that into place. And lastly, I know our transportation directors are doing so much right now with, we have driver shortages, we have many things that, are concerns to our directors that I felt fell into the category of kind of a quality of service to the students that we transport. And, as I look at some of these concerns, we're rescheduling or postponing or even chartering some of our field trips or activity trips that we would have normally done ourselves. We're also integrating double runs where we pick up students early for school and we pick up students on time to school, and then we take 2 trips home as well. And so, our transportation directors are really trying to adapt with, the shortage. I've always kind of looked at our bus driver shortage as really showing us how efficient we can be. And unfortunately, we're reducing some of that quality of service for the students we transport. I've had many districts look at, how can they become more efficient and, save some of their driver time. And so they're looking into different softwares. So that might be something to talk about with your transportation directors. We're using software that could alleviate some of the time that, you and your staff, instead of driving buses all the time, is there a software we can use that could help you consolidate routes, be more efficient that way? And then last, we have a lot of, we have older buses in the state. We have many that have 3G technology. And so as 3G is being phased out, again, we got to look at, how are we going to replace that 3G technology that's on our school buses? So there's always, changes in transportation and a lot of the pieces that we have to deal with. That really concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, or you can actually contact me directly and I'll get back with you as well. So.
Appreciate it, Ron. Any questions from those in the room here? So we do have a question from the chat. If busing is so important to educating children, why don't charter schools get funding for transportation? Sorry, James, we shouldn't laugh, but.
So really the challenge right now is probably more identified as school of choice. And we have many districts that have school or program of choice options that are going on that they're not receiving funding for. And so probably the biggest reason for not funding is we don't receive enough funds to open that door right now. And as soon as it does, we're going to have a lot more funds, even with our districts, that would then qualify for that scenario. And that's probably the best answer I can give. There is one grant that's available, which right now only one charter school receives, that provides funding for transportation. So if, until that that rule gets adjusted to where more qualify, or we receive enough extra funding to cover some of these costs, that would be probably how we would see that change. Again, if you're on my email list, I try to send out different grant information. I've sent out some recent ones on school bus grants, which would replace older buses for newer ones. Charter schools, many of the programs that are available to charter schools that way.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate, even though we don't have an active busing program at our school, our charter school, you're very good at communicating, and I do review those. Yeah, I was just going to say, you probably want to just contact your legislator. If you're in a district of 4th, 5th, or 6th class, or maybe it's just 5th or 6th class, a county of that 5th or 6th class, I think you actually qualify for transportation funding for charter schools or small schools within that, within those counties. I know the legislature addressed that a number of years ago. Like I said, I think Pinnacle Canyon is probably the only one that actually receives that funding right now, but if you have a rural school, you should be looking into that funding.
Yeah, and so he's actually referencing the rural transportation grant, which is in our R277600. I believe it's 13. But there are a few requirements for that. One is tied to how economically disadvantaged that area is as well. And so that's going to be one of the requirements for that transportation grant.
Thank you, Ron, for your input, and Craig as well. Yeah, I typed into the chat, but my suggestion as well would be contact your legislators if that's, something that your LEA is looking at, and also work with the charter advocacy organizations like UAPCS and UCN, as well as SCSB if you're authorized by them or another authorizer. But yeah, any other questions for Ron on transportation? He does a great job. Someday we'll have our finance section have as complete of trainings as he does. He's going to tutor me there on getting a SharePoint together. So thank you, Ron. We really appreciate you. Thank you, Brett and your team, John, Laura, and Dallin. Cole's been with us this whole time, but he got off easy today. And thank you to Tony, as well as, our earlier presenters, Sarah Young. And so we wanted to review just a little bit and see if there were any follow-up questions, and then ask you, to either at this point let us know if you have any training requests. We've had some follow-up questions from Dale's great presentation on MSP and allotment memos and that kind of thing. If you have any more needs from the CNP folks or anything like that, so I'll open that up to the group here in the room and on the chat. Any further requests for trainings or follow-ups, we will definitely look at the format, whether we try to keep sort of a hybrid option. I know that kind of can introduce some tech issues, so whether we go all virtual or all in person and record it, we will definitely look at that. But if you have preferences either way, I may work on a quick optional Qualtrics survey, and try not to bother you, but just want to provide training resources for you that are helpful, that are useful, that are applicable to every LEA as much as possible. But definitely, if you feel like you have a training need in your LEA, we would love to come help you out in whatever way we can, or help you find a similar sized school, similar sized LEA with a similar or the same accounting system, whatever that may be. So we really appreciate you being here with us today and being patient with a few tech issues. But please, any feedback from the group here? Well, I don't think anybody will complain with getting out of here at 2:30, but we'll keep you posted as soon as we do have the finalized versions of the presentations and the recording. We will post that to our website and send out an email. One other quick update: if you've recently had changes or need an email address added or removed from our charter school business officials or our district business officials, we are working with our IT department on that. And so we will keep you posted when those are able to be updated. But thank you again, and please reach out to us if there's anything that we can do for you.